Don't drink that wine. Annie Brooks said it loud enough to stop Richard Langford before the rim of the glass touched his mouth. Richard stood in the middle of a circle of VIP guests. His crystal glass paused only a few inches from his lips. "What did you just say?" "Don't drink it, Mr. Langford," Annie said again, clearer this time. "There's something wrong with that wine, sir." A few soft laughs rose from the guests around him. "Is this some kind of stunt?" a man in a gray suit asked. Mr. Grayson, the banquet manager, rushed toward her. "Get back to your position right now," he hissed. "You're ruining the event." Annie did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the wine. "Please believe me," she said. Her voice broke, and she hated that it did. "That wine isn't right. I'm not here to make a scene." "Isn't right?" Richard repeated. His tone was calm. "In what way?" Annie swallowed. "The seal was changed," she said. "And the bottle didn't come through the official inspection route." A woman in a black dress with diamonds at her throat looked Annie up and down. "And who are you to make that kind of accusation?" she asked. "A server," Annie answered. The woman gave a small laugh. "That's all?" The woman leaned back in her chair. "Then you're interrupting a very important fundraiser." Mr. Grayson stepped in quickly, trying to smile at Richard while still blocking Annie with his body. "I apologize, Mr. Langford. She's only part-time staff. Perhaps the pressure of the evening. Let her speak." Richard's voice was not loud, but it cut cleanly through the noise. Mr. Grayson stopped. Richard looked at her. "Go on," he said. "Someone switched the bottle during internal transport," she said slowly, forcing each word to stay steady. "The man who brought it in here wasn't on the wine service list." The man standing near the VIP table, dressed in a black suit with a sommelier towel folded over one arm, gave a quiet laugh. "You mean me?" he asked. Annie turned toward him. "Who are you?" "Backup sommelier," he said at once. "There's no backup sommelier listed for this room," Annie said. Several guests looked away from Annie and toward the man. For the first time, his smile thinned. Richard set the glass down on the table. "So," Richard said, still watching Annie. "You want me not to drink it?" "Yes," Annie said. "Because you believe someone switched it." "No, sir," Annie said. "Because I know someone did." The man in the black suit adjusted one of his gloves. "How interesting," he said. "A server can be so certain." Annie looked straight at him. "And a backup sommelier shows up exactly when a bottle comes in through the wrong hallway." Mr. Grayson tried again. "Mr. Langford, we really shouldn't make this bigger than it is. I'm sure there's a simple explanation." Richard raised one hand. The manager fell silent. "Girl," he said, "you should understand this is not something to joke about. If you are wrong, you will certainly pay a price for disrupting my ceremony." "Are you sure?" he asked. She looked once more at the glass. "No one should drink it," she said. Richard slowly moved his hand away from the glass. Then he turned his head toward the broad-shouldered man standing near the edge of the room. Samuel Price, his head of security, had already begun moving forward. "No one touches the wine," Richard said. "No one touches the bottle, and no one leaves through the service corridors." The man in the black suit stopped smiling. Charles Whitaker, Richard's chief financial officer, stepped out from behind the donor table, his expression carefully arranged. "Richard," he said, "surely we can handle this privately. The press is here. The board is here. We don't need to frighten people over a misunderstanding." Richard did not answer right away. "What's your name?" he asked. "Annie Brooks," she said. Richard nodded once. "Annie Brooks," he said, as if making sure the room heard it too. "You're coming with me. I want every detail." Behind him, the untouched glass of wine sat beneath the chandelier, red and quiet against the white tablecloth. It had never reached his lips, but from that moment on, the gala was no longer a celebration. It was a crime scene wearing evening clothes. "Sir," the banquet manager cut in, his voice tight. "We truly apologize for this disruption, but Annie is only a temporary server. She has not been trained to identify wine." Richard lifted one hand for silence. The manager stopped at once. "You said someone switched the bottle," Richard said, looking at Annie. "How do you know?" Annie froze for half a second. "I saw the glue mark," she said. "That kind doesn't come from the main distributor." The man in the black suit gave a very soft laugh. "Because of a line of glue, you stopped the wine at an entire gala?" he asked. Annie turned to him. "You seem very interested in why I noticed it." A second of silence passed. "I'm curious," he said. "Or you don't want me to have noticed it." Annie said. Samuel Price reached the head table without hurry. Who touched either one after she spoke? He asked. No one, Richard said. Samuel turned to Mr. Grayson. Clear the immediate table. Slowly. No announcements. No hands near the wine. Mr. Grayson looked as if he wanted to argue, but Richard's silence told him not to. Samuel took a pair of black gloves from his jacket pocket and put them on with the calm care of a man who had done this kind of thing before. Then he glanced at Annie. You stay where I can see you, he said. Annie nodded. Charles Whitaker remained near Richard's shoulder, polished and composed. Samuel, Charles said quietly. This can be handled in the VIP lounge. We don't need to alarm the donors. Samuel looked at him. The donors are not my first concern. Charles's smile did not move. Of course not. I simply mean there's a procedure for these things. There is, Samuel said, and we're in it. Richard heard the edge in Samuel's voice. No photographs, Samuel said. The man lowered it fully. Richard stepped closer to Annie, though not too close. You said you saw the bottle come through the wrong hallway. Yes, sir. When? Maybe 12 minutes before you lifted the glass. I didn't check my phone. We're not supposed to keep them on us during service. Where were you standing? By the service station behind the stage curtain, near the extra water pitchers. Samuel nodded. Good. Keep it that exact. No guessing. Richard turned to Samuel. Where do you want us? VIP lounge. You, Miss Brooks. Charles, if he insists, and no one else. I want the glass and bottle secured first. I do insist, Charles said. As CFO of the foundation, I need to understand what's being alleged. Samuel did not answer. He took an evidence bag from another security officer who had appeared at his side. Photograph it in place, then the glass, then the table setting. Wide shot first, close up after. Get the label, seal, cork, and pour line. Annie saw the neck under the lights again, the faint line where someone had wiped it too clean. There, she said before she could stop herself. Samuel paused. What? The neck. That's the mark I meant. It's too clean around the seal. The other bottles had dust from the crate. Samuel looked, then tilted the bottle a fraction. He did not praise her. Photograph that. They moved toward the VIP lounge. Sit down. I'm okay. That wasn't a question. Richard sat across from her. Charles remained standing. Mr. Grayson hovered near the door until Samuel looked at him. You're not needed in here. I'm responsible for banquet operations. Then operate somewhere else. Mr. Grayson looked to Richard for help, so he left. Closing the door with more care, Samuel took out a small notebook. Start again. From the first moment anything felt wrong. Annie looked at Richard, then at Samuel. Do I need a lawyer? Charles gave a short laugh. Why would you need a lawyer if you're telling the truth? Samuel turned his head toward Charles. Don't do that. Samuel looked back at Annie, his voice lower. You're not under arrest. You're a witness. If at any point you want your mother here, or you want to stop talking until police arrive, you say so. Right now I'm asking because time matters. I want my mother to know where I am, she said. Give me her number, Samuel said. One of my people will call her and tell her you're safe. Don't tell her I'm in trouble. You're not. Anu gave him the number. Then she began telling everything that had happened that night. The bottle for Mr. Langford was supposed to come from the wine room, Annie said. Mr. Bell was supposed to check the seal and write the number in the log. Then it goes through the east corridor, past the linen closet, straight to the donor table service station. But it didn't, Samuel said. No, sir. It came from the west hallway, the one by internal deliveries. Charles crossed his arms. Large events require adjustments. Annie looked at him. She did not raise her voice. Not for that bottle. Mrs. Carter said. That bottle had its own route. Richard leaned back slightly. Why would she tell you that? Because I asked why everyone was acting nervous around one bottle. Samuel wrote that down. Then you saw the man. Yes. Describe him again. White, maybe 40s, dark hair, black suit, sommelier towel, no badge, thin gloves. Silver ring on his right hand, scar near the wrist, walked a little heavy on one side. Had you seen him before tonight? No. Did he see you watching him? Annie hesitated. Samuel noticed. Truth. He looked at me once, she said. Not long. But I think he knew I noticed the bottle. Samuel asked. Then what? I checked the log. The name said Patrick Wells. But Patrick doesn't work here anymore. One of the servers joked about it last week because his locker still had tape on it. Charles looked toward Richard. That could be an old form. No, Annie said. It was tonight's sheet. Samuel wrote again. Then you heard the phone call. Annie's voice dropped. He was near the west corridor, half behind the curtain. He said, he drinks before the toast. After that, it looks natural. Richard looked at the sealed glass. Samuel closed the notebook. Mr. Langford, until we know otherwise, we treat this as a credible threat. Charles exhaled. Based on the word of a part-time waitress? Richard turned to him slowly. No, he said. Based on the fact that she noticed more in 1 hour than the rest of us did all night. If you believe Annie deserves respect for seeing what everyone else missed, please like this video, comment where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional and inspiring stories. Charles's expression hardened, just for a second. The silence after Richard's words lasted only a moment. But it was enough for Annie to see who in the room knew how to hide fear, and who did not. Charles recovered first. He looked down at his cufflinks, adjusted one with his thumb, and gave a careful breath through his nose. Richard, I'm not dismissing her. I'm asking us to be responsible. A gala of this size involves hundreds of moving parts. A temporary server sees something she doesn't understand. The room reacts, and suddenly we're treating a bottle of wine like evidence in a murder trial. Samuel looked at him without blinking. That's exactly how evidence starts. Charles's mouth tightened. Richard stood. He was not tall in a way that filled a room by force, but people moved differently when he rose. Even Charles shifted half a step back. Where is the security room? Richard asked. Samuel checked his watch. Down the service hall, past the kitchen, first door after the staff elevators. Then we go there. Charles stepped in. Richard, you should stay here. Let Samuel do his job. I am letting him do his job. I'm also going to see what happened in my building, at my event, with a glass that was in my hand. Samuel did not argue. He looked at Annie. You come too. Annie stood so quickly the chair legs scraped the carpet. She reached for the tray out of habit, then stopped. Her hands felt strange without it, like she had set down the only thing that explained why she belonged in the room. Richard noticed. Leave it, he said. You're not serving anyone right now. The words were simple, but they landed in Annie's chest. They moved out of the VIP lounge through the same corridor with the framed photographs. Outside the closed ballroom doors, the gala had resumed in a wounded, uneven way. Someone had told the band to play again. The music came through the walls too softly, like a lie trying not to be noticed. A woman laughed too loudly. A man asked whether the auction would continue. The old rhythms of money and manners were trying to return. In the service hall, those rhythms vanished. The carpet gave way to polished concrete. The air smelled of butter, dish soap, hot metal, and steam. Servers moved along the walls with trays pressed close to their bodies, slowing when they saw Richard Langford walking through their world. Most had never seen him from this side of the hotel. Annie had. This was the side with stacked crates, rolling racks of linens, half-drunk coffee cups, and workers eating quickly from plastic containers when no one important was watching. This was where her feet usually hurt before anyone at the donor tables had finished the salad course. Mrs. Lillian Carter stood near the kitchen entrance with a rack of clean glasses. She was in her 60s, small but straight-backed, with silver hair pinned under a black service cap. Her eyes went from Annie to Richard, then to Samuel. Annie, she said quietly, you all right? Annie nodded. Yes, ma'am. Lillian did not look convinced. You tell the truth? Yes, ma'am. Then stand in it. No one else seemed to understand what that meant, but Annie did. She carried the words with her down the hall. The security room was narrow and cold, lit by a wall of monitors. A young technician in a hotel blazer sat at the main console, his face already shiny with sweat. Beside him stood a security supervisor with a radio clipped to his belt and fear in his eyes. Samuel walked in first. Pull the west service hallway from 8:10 to 8:20. The technician glanced at the supervisor. Samuel's voice hardened. Don't look at him. Pull it. The man began typing. On the center monitor, the west service hallway appeared. It showed a stretch of corridor near the internal delivery entrance, a stack of wine crates against one wall, and the edge of a curtain leading toward the ballroom service station. Annie leaned forward without meaning to. Samuel noticed. Tell me when we're near the moment. The timestamp moved. 8:11. 8:12. A busboy crossed with a tub of plates. A woman from Floral carried away a box of wilted stems. Nothing unusual. Then the image flickered. The hallway went still. A service card appeared at the edge of the frame, but it did not move. The curtain at the far end hung in the exact same fold. A paper napkin on the floor stayed flat, even though air usually shifted through that corridor whenever the kitchen doors opened. Annie felt the cold before Samuel spoke. Pause, he said. The technician froze the footage. Samuel pointed at the screen. Back 15 seconds. The technician obeyed. They watched again. The image flickered. The same still hallway returned. Samuel said, "That's not live footage." The supervisor cleared his throat. "Could be a camera refresh. It happens sometimes during big events." Samuel turned slowly. "A refresh that lasts 6 minutes?" The supervisor had no answer. Samuel leaned closer to the monitor. "Run it forward." The timestamp continued, but the hallway barely changed. Then at 8:18, the image flickered again, and suddenly a server crossed the frame with a tray of champagne flutes. Annie pointed. "That's wrong." Everyone looked at her. She swallowed. "The cart wasn't there when I came through, and that napkin wasn't on the floor. I remember because I picked up a napkin by the curtain earlier, but it was folded, not flat like that." Charles gave a short sigh. "Annie, with respect, remembering a napkin in a hotel hallway is not proof of anything." Lillian Carter's voice came from the doorway. No one had noticed her follow them. "It is if she picked it up." Charles looked annoyed. "Mrs. Carter, this is a security matter." Lillian did not move. "Then maybe security ought to hear from the people who work in the hall." Richard looked at her. "You know this route? I've worked this hotel 28 years, Lillian said. "I know which doors stick in winter and which coffee urn burns if you touch the left handle. That hallway gets a draft every time the kitchen swings open. A napkin doesn't lie still there for 6 minutes." Samuel nodded once. "Thank you." The technician's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "There may be backup storage." "Where?" Samuel asked. "Local server first. Off-site backup after that. But I don't have full access. Hotel IT does." "Get them." The supervisor shifted. At this hour, the IT director might not be on property. Samuel looked at Richard. Richard took out his phone. "He is now." Charles stepped closer. "Richard, before you start calling department heads, think about what happens when this gets out. The hospital depends on tonight. If donors panic. If I drink that wine and die," Richard said, "the hospital loses more than donors." Charles went quiet. Annie watched him. It was not the silence of a man who had been convinced. It was the silence of a man who had begun choosing his next words carefully. Samuel turned back to the technician. "Show me the east corridor at the same time." The footage changed. The official wine route appeared. Mr. Bell, the wine steward, stood at a small table, checking bottles against a clipboard. At 8:13, he looked down the hallway, frowned, and spoke to another worker. No special bottle left with him. No VIP pour moved through the proper route. "There," Annie said. "That's what I meant. It never came through East Service." Richard stared at the screen. On the monitor, the rules of the night were simple. The right hallway had no bottle. The wrong hallway had 6 missing minutes. Samuel asked, "Where is Mr. Bell now?" The supervisor spoke into his radio. A moment later, a reply crackled back. "Wine room. Says he's been there since before the toast." "Bring him here," Samuel said. Quietly, the wait for Mr. Bell lasted less than 3 minutes, but in that room it felt longer. Richard stood with one hand resting on the back of a chair. Annie stayed near Lillian, who had not asked permission to remain, and did not look like she intended to leave. Charles checked his phone twice, each time turning the screen slightly away from the others. Samuel noticed that too. Mr. Bell arrived out of breath, a thin man in a burgundy vest, with reading glasses hanging from a cord around his neck. He looked terrified when he saw Richard. "Mr. Langford, sir, I don't know what's happened, but I signed out no bottle for your toast." Richard's face changed very little. "You're certain?" "Yes, sir. I was waiting on confirmation from Mr. Grayson. The bottle never left my room." Annie felt the words pass through her like a draft under a door. The bottle on Richard's table had not been mishandled. It had been replaced. Samuel asked, Can you prove the original is still there? Mr. Bell nodded quickly. Yes. Locked cabinet. Same serial. Same vintage. I can show you. Charles spoke before Samuel could answer. Or perhaps there were two bottles from the same lot. Mr. Bell shook his head. Not for that label. Not tonight. One bottle. Special request. Logged this morning. Samuel looked at Richard. We need the original secured now. Richard nodded. Do it. Samuel gave orders to two guards and sent them with Mr. Bell. Then he turned to Annie. You said the man in the black suit spoke on the phone. Yes. Did you hear anything else? Annie searched her memory. The hallway. The curtain. The man's voice low near the service door. The smell of wine and floor polish. His gloved fingers around the bottle neck. He said before the toast, she murmured. Then he said, after that, it looks natural. And then he said, one more thing. Samuel waited. Annie looked at Richard. He said, the audit never happens. For the first time that night, Richard Langford's calm broke just enough for everyone to see it. Charles's phone stopped moving in his hand. Charles recovered faster than anyone else in the room. Audit? He repeated, with the faintest lift of his eyebrows. Annie, are you sure that's what you heard? The way he said her name made it sound borrowed, like he had picked it up only because Richard had forced the room to remember it. Annie kept her eyes on him. Yes. You heard a stranger in a service hallway talking about an audit, Charles said. In the middle of a gala. With music, kitchen noise, staff moving everywhere. I heard him. Samuel stepped between them just enough to change the shape of the room. Let's not coach the witness. Charles gave him a mild look. I'm not coaching anyone. I'm asking a reasonable question. A word like audit can sound like anything in a noisy hallway. Richard had not spoken. He stood near the monitor, his hand still on the back of the chair. Annie noticed his knuckles had gone pale. The word had struck him somewhere private. Samuel noticed too. Richard? Richard looked at the blank edge of the monitor, not at Charles. I was scheduled to sign an independent audit order Monday morning. No one moved. Mr. Bell, still standing near the doorway, whispered, Of the foundation? Richard nodded once. All accounts, all donor programs, all vendor contracts. Charles let out a controlled breath. Richard, we discussed this. I never opposed transparency. I only said timing matters. Dropping an audit order 2 days after the largest fundraiser of the year could make donors nervous. Samuel turned his head. Who knew about it? Richard looked at Charles then. My office. Legal. Samuel. You. Julian Cross. Because he complained about it over lunch last week. Maybe 2 board members. Charles spread his hands. So half the leadership circle, not some secret, not the staff, Samuel said. Not a fake sommelier in a service hallway. The room tightened again. Richard's phone buzzed in his hand. He looked at the screen, answered, and listened without speaking. His face gave nothing away, but the longer he listened, the quieter everyone became. Lock it down, he said finally. No one opens it but Samuel. He ended the call and looked at the group. The original bottle is still in the wine room. Same label, same vintage, seal intact. Annie felt her knees weaken, but she stayed standing. Mrs. Lillian Carter reached behind her and pushed a chair closer without making a show of it. Annie did not sit. Not yet. Samuel turned to the hotel supervisor. I want the bottle from the table and the original bottle kept separate. I want the logs copied, not moved. I want the badge record for every door between the wine room, West Service Hallway, and ballroom from 7:30 to now. The supervisor nodded too quickly. Yes, sir. And I want the man in the black suit found. Charles glanced toward the hallway. He may have already left. If this is a misunderstanding, holding staff or contractors without cause could create legal problems. Samuel's eyes settled on him. A poisoned glass would create bigger ones. For the first time, Charles did not answer. Richard looked at Annie. You saw him clearly enough to identify him again? Yes, sir. Good. The word was simple, but Annie heard what came with it. Responsibility. Danger. The room had shifted from asking whether she was wrong to needing her to be right. The technician at the console cleared his throat. Mr. Price, it is connecting remotely. They say the backup might take 15 or 20 minutes. Samuel said, make it 10. The technician typed like his fingers had been threatened. Richard stepped closer to Annie. "Is your mother on her way?" Annie blinked. "I don't know. I only asked for someone to call her." Samuel checked with the younger guard, who nodded. Message delivered. Mrs. Brooks was told Annie is safe, and with Mr. Langford's security team. She said she's coming. Annie's stomach tightened. "She's coming here?" "She asked where you were," Samuel said. "We told her." Annie looked down. Her mother had already worked one shift that day. She would take the bus across town, probably still in her grocery store uniform, worried because her daughter had said not to tell her she was in trouble, which meant she knew something was wrong. Richard read enough of Annie's face to understand. She'll be brought through the front entrance. Annie looked up. "She won't like that." "Why?" "She uses the entrance people tell her to use." That landed harder than she meant it to. Richard's expression changed. Not much, but enough. He glanced toward the hallway where service workers passed with lowered voices and fast steps. He had hosted events in this hotel for years. He had shaken hands under its chandeliers, posed in front of its banners, thanked donors by name. He had probably never once walked in through the alley entrance. He said, "Tonight, she uses the front." Charles looked impatient. "Richard, with respect, we are losing focus." "No," Richard said. "I'm beginning to find it." The technician leaned toward the screen. "Backup is loading." The monitor flickered. The west service hallway appeared again, this time from a slightly different angle, grainier but continuous. The timestamp read 8:12. Everyone moved closer. A busboy crossed with plates. A floral worker passed. Then the hallway emptied. At 8:14, the man in the black suit entered from the internal delivery door, carrying a wine bottle wrapped in a white service cloth. He paused near the camera, not looking up, but placing his body just enough to block the label. He was good, but not perfect. His right foot dragged a little. A silver ring flashed when he adjusted the cloth. Annie's breath stopped. "That's him," she said. Samuel did not look away from the screen. "Keep rolling." The man removed something from inside his jacket. Small, flat, and pale. A replacement seal. He turned the bottle, worked quickly at the neck, then wiped it with a folded towel. He took another bottle from a service cart, placed the wrapped one on the tray, and pushed it toward the curtain that led to the ballroom station. The footage showed his face for less than 2 seconds when he glanced toward the kitchen. Samuel paused it. The face froze on the monitor. White male, 40s, dark hair, clean jaw, no expression. His eyes were not nervous. That was what made Annie cold. He looked like a man doing a job. Mr. Bell whispered, "He's not with us." The hotel supervisor said, "I don't know him." Samuel turned to Annie. "No doubt?" "No doubt," Charles spoke softly. "Then we have our intruder." Samuel did not move. An intruder with a working access badge. An intruder who knew the VIP wine route had changed. An intruder who knew the toast schedule. An intruder talking about an audit. Charles's jaw tightened. "Say what you're implying." "I haven't started implying yet." Richard kept staring at the frozen face. "Find his badge entry." The technician typed again. A log appeared. At 8:11 p.m., West internal delivery door opened with badge ID 4471. The supervisor frowned. "That badge is inactive." "Name?" Samuel said. The technician clicked. "Patrick Wells." Annie looked at Richard. "That's the name from the wine log." Samuel's voice went flat. A former employee's badge was reactivated, used to enter the wrong hallway, and signed into a wine log for a bottle that never left the wine room. Richard turned toward Charles. "Who can reactivate a badge?" The supervisor answered before Charles could. "Hotel Security Administration, Senior Event Management, and authorized foundation liaisons for temporary access." Samuel asked, "Which foundation liaisons?" The supervisor looked uncomfortable. "I'd need to pull the permissions list." "Pull it," Charles said. "This is becoming a witch hunt." Annie looked at him. "No, sir. A witch hunt starts without proof." The room went still again. Charles looked at her as if she had forgotten her place. Richard looked at her as if she had just named it. Before anyone could speak, the door opened, and the younger guard stepped in. "Mrs. Brooks is downstairs." Annie turned at once. Samuel said, "Bring her up." Richard corrected him. "I'll meet her." Charles stared. "You cannot be serious." Richard buttoned his jacket. A woman's daughter stopped me from drinking what may have been a poisoned glass of wine. I can walk to an elevator. He started toward the door, then stopped beside Annie. You stay with Samuel, he said. No one takes you anywhere without his say. Annie nodded. Richard left the security room with 2 guards behind him. On the monitor, the frozen image of the fake sommelier remained. Annie looked at it and realized the man had not simply switched a bottle. He had seen her see him. Richard Langford did not often use public elevators. In most hotels, there was a private route for men like him, a quiet passage arranged by assistants and security staff before he arrived. He had spent years moving through cities without touching the ordinary machinery of them. Private cars, private entrances, private rooms, private hands opening private doors. But that night, as he walked toward the lobby of the Harrington Grand, he became aware of every employee who stepped aside for him. A housekeeper holding a stack of folded towels moved against the wall. A young dishwasher in a stained apron froze with a crate in his hands. A bellman nodded too quickly. Richard saw their faces, and for the first time that evening, he wondered how many of them knew his name while he knew none of theirs. Samuel had stayed upstairs with Annie. 2 guards walked behind Richard, close enough to act but not close enough to make a scene. Charles had remained in the security room, saying he needed to make calls to stabilize the board. Richard had not answered him. He no longer trusted any sentence with the word stabilize in it. When the elevator opened into the lobby, the world changed again. Marble floors, fresh flowers, brass lamps, a pianist near the lounge playing something old and soft. Guests in evening clothes crossed the room with programs in their hands. A few turned when they saw Richard, then looked away because wealthy people were trained not to stare at other wealthy people in distress. Near the front desk stood a woman in a navy grocery store jacket. Her hair pulled back, one hand gripping the strap of her purse. She was breathing hard as if she had hurried from the bus stop. The security guard beside her looked uncertain, caught between hotel rules and the fact that Richard Langford himself was walking toward them. "Mrs. Brooks?" Richard asked. The woman turned. Her eyes went over his tuxedo, the guards behind him, the hotel lobby, then back to his face. "I'm Naomi Brooks," she said. "Where is my daughter?" "She's upstairs. She's safe." Naomi did not soften. "Then take me to her." Richard nodded. Of course. He expected anger, maybe fear, maybe questions. Naomi gave him something harder to manage. Control. She was tired, but she was not small. Her shoes were plain. Her jacket still carried the name of the market where she worked. Nothing about her belonged to the lobby, and yet she stood there as if the lobby would have to make room. As they entered the elevator, Richard said, "Mrs. Brooks, Annie may have saved my life tonight." Naomi looked straight ahead. "Then I'm proud of her. But I still need to see her." The answer was so direct that Richard fell silent. Upstairs, the security room had grown colder in Annie's mind, though the temperature had not changed. The frozen image of the fake sommelier remained on one monitor. His face watched them from the hallway footage. Annie tried not to look at it, but every few seconds her eyes returned. Samuel stood near the console, speaking quietly into his phone. "No, not hotel police. City police. Detective Alvarez if she's available. Tell her I said attempted poisoning. Possible internal access. Foundation connection. Quiet arrival. No uniforms through the ballroom unless necessary." He ended the call and turned to Annie. "You doing all right?" Annie wanted to say yes. People liked yes. Yes made things easier. Instead, she said, "I don't know." Samuel nodded once, as if that was the better answer. Fair. Lillian Carter had stayed near the door. She had brought Annie a paper cup of water from the staff station and a small roll wrapped in a napkin. Annie had not touched the roll. "You need something in your stomach," Lillian said. "I can't." "You can. You just don't feel like you can." Annie took the roll because Mrs. Carter's voice reminded her of women from church basements who could make a room obey with one look. She broke off a small piece and swallowed it dry. Charles stood by the far wall, phone in hand, no longer typing. He watched Annie with the careful patience of a man waiting for a witness to make one mistake. "You understand," he said, "that once police arrive, this becomes permanent. Names in reports. Statements. Lawyers. Media. You're 18, aren't you?" Annie looked at him. Yes. Then you're old enough to understand consequences. Samuel turned. Charles, I'm simply making sure she understands the weight of what she's saying. Annie felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she refused to let it become tears. I understood the weight when he lifted the glass. Charles's expression closed. The door opened before he could answer. Naomi Brooks stepped in first, and Annie stood so fast the chair moved backward. Mama. Naomi crossed the room and took Annie's face in both hands, not gently, not roughly, but like she needed to feel that her daughter was real. She looked at Annie's eyes, her mouth, her shoulders, her hands. You hurt? No, Mom. Anybody touch you? No. Naomi pulled her close then, and Annie let herself fold into the hug for 2 breaths, only 2. Then she stepped back because too many people were watching. Naomi saw the sealed bottle on the table, the frozen face on the monitor, Samuel, Charles, the guards, and Richard. She put the pieces together without anyone explaining much. What happened? She asked. Richard answered before Annie had to. Your daughter saw a bottle of wine switched before it was served to me. She warned me not to drink it. We have since confirmed the original bottle never left the wine room. A former employee badge was used, and security footage was tampered with. Naomi's eyes moved back to Annie. You saw all that? Annie shook her head. Not all at first. Just enough. Naomi looked at the monitor. Is that him? Yes. Naomi stared at the man's frozen face for a long second. Then don't let her out of your sight. Samuel said, I won't. Charles stepped forward with a softer tone. Mrs. Brooks, everyone is grateful, Annie spoke up, but this is a sensitive matter. Until we know more, it would be best if she remained calm and avoided making statements beyond what she directly observed. Naomi turned to him. And who are you? Charles Whitaker, Chief Financial Officer of the Foundation. You her lawyer? No. You police? No. Then don't tell my daughter how much truth she's allowed to tell. Lillian Carter looked down, but Annie saw the small smile she hid. Richard almost smiled too. Almost. Samuel's phone buzzed. He listened, then looked at Richard. Alvarez is 10 minutes out. Plain clothes. She'll enter through the north lobby. Richard nodded. Good. The technician at the console spoke without turning around. Mr. Price, I have the permissions list for badge reactivation. The room stilled. Samuel walked to the screen. Put it up. A short list appeared. Hotel Security Administration. Senior Event Operations. Foundation Executive Liaison. Temporary Vendor Access Coordinator. Each line carried names, initials, and timestamps. Samuel leaned closer. Badge 4,470. One was reactivated at 7:42 p.m. By whom? Richard asked. The technician hesitated. Samuel's voice lowered. Read it. The technician swallowed. Authorized through Foundation Liaison Credentials. Richard's face hardened. Name. C. Whitaker. No one spoke. Charles let out a laugh that came too quickly. That is impossible. My credentials are used by my office for vendor processing. My assistant may have... Your assistant is here tonight? Samuel asked. No. Then who used them? Charles's eyes flicked once toward the door. I don't know. Annie saw it. It was fast, but she had been watching men like him all night. He had not looked toward the door because he wanted to leave. He had looked because someone out there mattered. Samuel saw it too. Richard's voice came quiet. Charles, who brought in the replacement wine vendor? Charles straightened. I approved the change because the original vendor had delivery issues. Mr. Bell, still near the wall, shook his head. There were no delivery issues with my wine inventory. Everything arrived yesterday. Charles looked at him with contempt he did not bother to hide. You manage bottles, I manage the foundation. Naomi said, sounds like somebody managed both tonight. The words hit the room hard because they were plain and true. Samuel's phone buzzed again. This time he put it on speaker. A guard's voice came through. Mr. Price, we checked the service exit cameras. The man from the footage left at 8:19 through the west loading bay. Samuel asked, did he leave the property? A pause. No, sir. Different camera caught him coming back in through the lower parking entrance at 8:31. He may still be inside. Annie's stomach dropped. Naomi moved closer to her daughter. Richard looked at Samuel. Find him. Samuel was already moving. Lock service elevators. Cover stairwells. No one from wine, catering, or vendor staff leaves without clearance. Charles said, "You cannot hold an entire hotel hostage." Samuel looked back at him. "Watch me." The monitor still held the fake sommelier's face. But now Annie understood something worse. He was not just a man from a video. He was somewhere in the building, and he knew the young woman who had stopped the glass from reaching Richard Langford's lips. Naomi took Annie's hand. Annie squeezed back, trying not to show how cold her fingers had become. Samuel's orders moved through the hotel faster than the music from the ballroom. Radios cracked to life. Guards who had been standing near donor entrances began walking toward stairwells. A service elevator chimed once and then went dark as someone locked it from the control panel. In the kitchen, cooks stopped plating dessert long enough to look at one another, then went back to work because food still had to leave on time, even when fear entered through the service door. Annie stayed beside her mother in the security room, watching the monitors shift from one hallway to another. Lower parking entrance, west loading bay, staff corridor, linen storage, stairwell B. Each screen showed part of the building, but none of them showed the man with the silver ring. Naomi's hand remained around Annie's. She did not squeeze too tightly. She only held on in a way that told Annie she was not going anywhere. Richard stood behind Samuel, arms at his sides, his face controlled but no longer distant. The billionaire from the ballroom had looked untouchable. This man looked awake. Where would he go? Richard asked. Samuel did not turn from the screens. If he came back in, he either forgot something, came for evidence, or came for the witness. Naomi's fingers tightened once. Annie forced herself to speak. The towel. Samuel looked at her. What towel? The one he used on the bottle. He wiped the neck with it. In the footage, he had the towel over his arm. When he left the hallway, I don't remember seeing it. Samuel turned to the technician. Replay the west hallway. After he switches the bottle, the footage ran again. Victor Hale entered, worked at the seal, wiped the bottle, moved with care. When he pushed the tray toward the curtain, the white towel was still in his hand. Then he stepped partly out of frame. Pause, Annie said. The technician froze the image. There, she said, pointing. He puts it in the service cart, bottom shelf. Samuel leaned closer. Where is that cart now? The hotel supervisor swallowed. Could be in dish return. Could be behind ballroom service. Carts rotate during dinner. Samuel spoke into his radio. Find the wine service cart from the west hallway. Bottom shelf may contain a white towel. No one touches it barehanded. A voice answered, Copy. Charles let out a quiet breath. We're now searching towels. Naomi turned on him. If somebody wiped poison off a bottle, yes. Charles looked at her as if she had spoken out of turn. Mrs. Brooks, I understand this is emotional for you. No, Naomi said. You don't. Richard glanced at her, then back to Charles. Stop talking to her like that. Charles's face hardened, but only for a second. I'm trying to keep the situation from spiraling. It spiraled when my wine was replaced, Richard said. The technician clicked between feeds. I have movement in the lower service corridor. Everyone looked at the central monitor. A man in a black suit moved through the corridor near the laundry room. The angle showed only his back. But Annie knew the walk before she saw the ring. The right foot hit heavier. The shoulders stayed steady. He did not look lost. That's him, Annie said. Samuel was already on the radio. Lower service corridor, outside laundry. 2 units, close from both ends. Do not approach alone. On the screen, Victor stopped near a door marked staff only. He looked over his shoulder, and for one brief moment his face turned toward the camera. Naomi whispered, Lord, keep us. Victor disappeared through the door. The supervisor said, That leads to the maintenance passage behind the freight elevators. Samuel asked, Can he reach the ballroom from there? Yes, or the west stairwell, or the parking level. Samuel cursed under his breath, not loudly, but enough for Annie to hear. He knows the building. Richard looked at the supervisor. How does a fake vendor know my hotel better than my guests do? The supervisor had no answer. A guard's voice came through the radio, breathing hard. We're at lower service, doors locked from the inside. Samuel said, Override it. Trying. Panels not responding. The technician bent over the keyboard. Someone's locked maintenance locally. I can reset it, but it'll take a minute. Samuel turned to Annie and Naomi. You both move to the VIP lounge now. Fewer access points. No, Naomi said. Samuel blinked once. Mrs. Brooks, my daughter stays where there are cameras and people with guns. Samuel looked at Richard. Richard did not interfere. Samuel nodded. Fair enough. Then stay behind me and away from the door. Annie understood the practical sense of it, but her eyes stayed on the screens. Victor had vanished into a part of the hotel the cameras did not see well. That made the building feel larger and smaller at the same time. Larger because there were too many places he could be. Smaller because every one of those places seemed to lead back to her. The radio crackled again. We found the cart. Samuel snatched the receiver. Location? Behind Ballroom Service Station 3. Do you see the towel? A pause. Yes, white towel, bottom shelf. Looks stained near one corner. Secure it. Bag it. Photograph first. Charles's jaw worked once. This is absurd. Richard looked at him. You've said that often tonight. Because it is. A reactivated badge, a towel, a server's memory. These are fragments. You cannot build a public accusation out of fragments. Samuel said. You can build an investigation out of them. Before Charles could answer, the door to the security room opened. Detective Maria Alvarez stepped in with a plain black coat over a dark suit. Her badge clipped at her belt. She looked to be in her 40s, compact, steady, with tired eyes that seemed to have no patience for theater. Samuel Price? She asked. Samuel nodded. Detective, give me the short version. Samuel did. Poisoned wine suspected. Bottle switched. Former employee badge reactivated. Footage tampered with. Suspect still in hotel. Witness present. He spoke in clean lines. No drama. Alvarez listened, eyes moving from Richard to Annie to Naomi to Charles. When Samuel finished, Alvarez looked at Annie. You're Annie Brooks? Yes, ma'am. You saw the suspect before the warning? Yes. You can identify him? Yes. Alvarez nodded. Good. You're not in trouble. Annie had been told that already, but hearing it from a detective did something different to her breathing. Alvarez turned to Richard. Mr. Langford, I understand you have private security. But from this point forward, anything collected needs chain of custody if you want it to survive court. Samuel lifted the evidence log. Already started. Good. She looked at Charles. And you are? Charles Whitaker, CFO of the Langford Foundation. Stay available. His eyebrows rose. Am I being detained? Not yet. The words were plain. Charles did not like them. A shout came through the radio. Contact. West stairwell landing. Samuel turned back to the monitor wall. The camera showed two guards rushing into the frame near the stairwell door. One reached for the handle. The door flew open from the other side, and Victor slammed the guard backward into the wall. The second guard lunged, but Victor threw something into his face. The guard stumbled, wiping at his eyes. Naomi pulled Annie back. Samuel barked into the radio. What did he throw? The answer came with coughing. Powder or spray, eyes burning, suspect moving up stairwell B. Alvarez drew her phone. I need units to the west stairwell, all exits covered. Richard took one step toward the door. Samuel blocked him without even looking. No, he's in my building, and he may be trying to draw people out of this room. That stopped Richard. Annie looked at the stairwell feed. For 2 seconds, Victor appeared on the landing between floors. Moving fast now, no longer pretending to be staff. The silver ring flashed as he gripped the rail. Then he looked up at the camera, not at the guards. Note at Samuel. At the camera, Annie felt, with certainty, that he knew she was watching. The screen went black. The technician jerked back. Camera feed cut. Samuel's voice dropped. He's not running blind. Alvarez looked at Charles. Who else has access to stairwell camera controls? Charles's face went cold. Detective, I don't control hotel cameras. No, Annie said quietly. Everyone turned. Annie was staring at the monitor that had gone dark. But someone knew which one he was about to pass. No one answered her. Then, somewhere beyond the security room door, deep in the service corridor, a fire alarm began to pulse. Not loud at first, Just 3 sharp notes. Then 3 more. The technician looked at his screen. Alarm triggered on the lower kitchen level. Samuel's face changed. He's clearing the building, Alvarez said. Or splitting your people. Naomi pulled Annie close. We are not moving. Samuel looked at the door, then at the monitors, then at Richard. Richard's voice came quiet. Annie was right about the bottle. She was right about the route. She was right about the man. Listen to her now. Samuel turned back to Annie. What do you see? Annie stared at the screens. Staff were starting to move. Kitchen workers looked toward exits. Guests in the ballroom began standing as the alarm reached them faintly through the walls. On one monitor, a service cart sat abandoned near the dessert station. On another, the west stairwell camera remained black. Then Annie saw a door at the far end of the ballroom service corridor open slowly. Not an exit door. Alina en closet. Her skin went cold. He's not leaving, she said. He's coming back for something. He's coming back for something. Annie heard her own voice and wished, for one foolish second, that someone would tell her she was wrong. No one did. Samuel Price moved to the monitor wall so quickly that the technician rolled his chair out of the way. Which screen? Samuel asked. Annie pointed. Service corridor outside the ballroom. The linen closet at the far end. On the monitor, the linen closet door had opened only a few inches. The hallway beyond it was shaking with movement now. Staff were reacting to the fire alarm. A young busboy pushed a cart too fast and nearly clipped the wall. 2 servers hurried past with trays still in their hands, unsure whether to keep working or run. The ballroom doors had opened, and the noise of confused guests began spilling into the service area. Zoom, Samuel said. The technician clicked. The image enlarged, grainy but clear enough. The linen closet door moved another inch. Naomi's hand tightened around Annie's wrist. What would he need from there? Annie's mouth went dry. She had worked enough hotel events to know linen closets held more than tablecloths. Extra uniforms, service aprons, towels, sometimes lost trays, cleaning supplies, staff coats, anything people needed to hide fast and retrieve later. The clothes, Annie said. He changed. Samuel nodded once, already on the radio. Unit near ballroom service. Approach linen closet from both sides. Suspect may have changed clothing. Watch for staff uniform, black vest, white shirt, anything service-related. Alvarez stepped closer to the screen. He could walk right through the staff. He already did, Annie said. The words were quiet, but everyone heard them. Charles gave a short, irritated breath. Or, it's an actual staff member getting linens during an alarm. Annie looked at him. During a fire alarm? People panic. Yes, she said, but he isn't panicking. On the screen, the door opened wider. A man stepped out carrying a folded stack of white tablecloths. He wore a waiter's vest now, not the black suit jacket. His head was lowered. No gloves, no sommelier towel, just another worker in a hotel full of workers. For a moment, Annie almost doubted herself. Then he turned his right hand under the stack of linen. The silver ring flashed. That's him, Annie said. Samuel's voice cut into the radio. He's in waiter uniform, white linens in his arms, moving east toward ballroom service station 3. The man walked calmly. That was what frightened Annie most. Everyone else was reacting to the alarm. But he moved like he had planned the sound, planned the confusion, planned the exact speed of a man who did not want to be remembered. 2 guards entered the far end of the hallway. Victor saw them and did not run at first. He shifted left, set the linens down on a service cart, and reached beneath the stack. Gun? Alvarez asked. Samuel said, everybody down. But Victor did not pull a gun. He pulled out a small black device, no bigger than a garage remote, and pressed it. The ballroom service lights went out. On 3 monitors, the cameras flickered. The technician swore under his breath. He's killing local power on that corridor. Samuel spoke into the radio. Flashlights. Close distance. Don't let him reach the ballroom. A crash came through the wall, faint but sharp, then shouting. The alarm grew louder as the hotel system fully engaged. In the ballroom, guests were standing now. Some moving toward the exits. Some refusing to leave their purses, phones, coats, dignity. The rich did not evacuate better than anyone else. They only looked more offended while doing it. Richard watched the screens, his jaw set. If he reaches the ballroom, he gets 400 people between us and him, Alvarez said, and maybe the press. Annie kept her eyes on the darkened corridor feed. One camera still worked from the far angle, showing shapes more than faces. Victor had disappeared behind a row of rolling dessert carts. "Wait," she said. Samuel turned. "What? He doesn't want the ballroom. You just said." "I know what I said." Annie stepped closer to the monitor. "But look, he had a clear path. He could have run through the ballroom doors when the lights went out. He didn't. He went behind the dessert carts." Naomi said, "Baby, step back." Annie did not. "What's behind those carts?" The hotel supervisor answered reluctantly. "Back prep room, small one, used for plated desserts and coffee service." "Does it connect anywhere?" Samuel asked. "To the old freight passage," the supervisor said. "Mostly unused. It runs behind the kitchen and comes out near the employee lockers." Samuel turned on him. "You didn't mention that. You asked about main routes." Samuel's eyes hardened. "Every route is a main route when a killer is using it." Alvarez was already moving toward the door. "I'll take 2 officers and cut off the locker side." Samuel looked at Richard. "You stay here." Richard did not argue this time. He looked at Annie and Naomi instead. "Both of you stay away from the door." Naomi gave him a look. "That was already my plan." Samuel almost smiled, but the radio crackled before he could. "Suspect in back prep. He dropped something. We need evidence team." "What did he drop?" Samuel asked. A guard answered, breathing hard. "Looks like a phone. Maybe broken." Charles, who had been very still, suddenly looked at his own phone. Annie saw it. So did Richard. "Charles," Richard said. Charles looked up. "What?" "Put your phone on the table." Charles blinked once. "Excuse me?" Richard's voice did not rise. "Put your phone on the table." "This is ridiculous." Alvarez stopped at the door and turned back. "Mr. Whitaker, do it." Charles gave a thin laugh. "Am I under arrest now?" "No," Alvarez said. "You're being asked not to be foolish." For a moment, Charles did nothing. Then he placed his phone on the table with 2 fingers, as if the object disgusted him. Samuel looked at the technician. "Can you see outgoing calls from internal lines?" The technician nodded. "From hotel phones, yes. Personal cells, no. Pull calls from Foundation Liaison Office, VIP Lounge, and donor table phones in the last hour." Charles said, "You have no authority to search Foundation communications." Alvarez replied, "Then call your attorney. After you step away from the phone." Charles's face tightened. The radio came alive again. "Suspect moving through freight passage. Officer down at kitchen corner. Not serious. He's heading toward employee lockers." Naomi pulled Annie behind her, though the danger was not in the room. Mothers did that. They put their bodies between their children and doors even when the threat was only on a screen. Annie watched the feed jump to the employee locker hallway. The image showed rows of dented gray lockers, a bench, a vending machine humming in the corner. This was the place where workers changed shoes, counted tips, called home, cried quietly, and went back out smiling. Victor burst into frame at the far end. He had lost the waiter vest. His white shirt was untucked. His face no longer looked calm. He slammed into the vending machine as a guard grabbed him from behind. Victor twisted, struck the guard in the ribs, and ran toward the lockers. Then Lillian Carter appeared from the side of the frame. Annie gasped. Lillian held a metal coffee urn in both hands. She swung it low, not at his head but at his knees. Victor hit it hard, stumbled, and crashed against the bench. The guard lunged again. Another guard came from the opposite side. Victor fought like a man with no plan left. But the hallway was narrow, and his luck had run out. Samuel spoke into the radio. "Secure his hands. Watch his mouth. Watch his pockets." On the monitor, they forced Victor to the floor. The room exhaled. Naomi whispered, "Thank you, Jesus." Annie could not move. Her eyes stayed on Mrs. Carter, who stood beside the vending machine, still holding the dented coffee urn. Breathing hard but upright. The radio crackled. "Suspect detained. Repeat. Suspect detained." Richard closed his eyes for 1 second. Then another guard's voice came through. "Mr. Price, the broken phone he dropped is still powered. Last outgoing call was 8:46. Samuel asked, "To whom?" The pause that followed was short, but Annie felt it in her stomach. the guard answered. Internal extension registered to Charles Whitaker. No one looked at Victor on the screen anymore. Everyone looked at Charles. Charles did not move. For a moment, the only sound in the security room came from the fire alarm pulsing somewhere below them and the radio static on Samuel's shoulder. Annie watched Charles the way she had watched the wine seal, looking for the small thing that did not belong. His face stayed calm, but his right thumb pressed once against the side of his index finger, hard enough to turn the skin white. Richard saw it too. "Charles," he said, "why would the man who switched my wine call your extension?" Charles looked at Richard as if wounded by the question. "I don't know." "Try again." "I said I don't know." His voice sharpened. Then he pulled it back. "Anyone can spoof an internal extension. Anyone can use a phone in a service area. This is exactly why we should not jump to conclusions in a room full of frightened people." Detective Alvarez stepped closer to the table where Charles's phone lay face down. "Mr. Whitaker, when was the last time you used your office extension tonight?" "I've been at the gala." "That wasn't my question." Charles looked at her. "I made several calls today. I don't keep a list in my head." Samuel spoke into the radio. "Bring the broken phone to Detective Alvarez." Bagged. "I want the call log photographed before anyone touches the screen again." "Copy," a guard answered. Richard's eyes did not leave Charles. "You knew about the audit." Charles gave a humorless smile. "So did others. You approved the vendor change. As part of my duties, your credentials reactivated Patrick Wells's badge." "My office credentials," Charles said, "not my hands. And now the man who used that badge called your extension." Charles turned slightly, addressing the room now, not Richard. "Do you hear how this sounds? A few disconnected facts arranged by people who want a villain before they have a case." Annie spoke before she knew she would. "Facts don't become disconnected just because you don't like where they point." Charles looked at her, and for the first time, the politeness left his face. "You should be very careful," he said. Naomi stepped in front of Annie. "Don't threaten my daughter. I am advising her." "No," Naomi said. "You're used to people being scared of your tone. There's a difference." Richard looked at Naomi, then at Charles. Something in him seemed to settle. "Charles, you're done advising anyone tonight." The door opened, and two plainclothes officers entered with a clear evidence bag. Inside was a cracked black phone, the screen lit with a web of broken lines. Alvarez took it without touching the device itself. The officer handed her a printed photo from a portable capture unit. "Last call," he said. 8:46 p.m. Duration 14 seconds. Internal extension 2307. Samuel looked at the hotel supervisor. Extension 2307. The supervisor checked his tablet. Foundation Operations Suite. Temporary command office assigned to Mr. Whitaker's team. Charles exhaled through his nose. "My team. Exactly. Do you know how many people had access to that room tonight?" Samuel asked. "How many?" Charles hesitated. Richard answered instead. 3. Charles, his deputy, and Julian Cross's assistant. Alvarez turned to Richard. "Julian Cross? Major donor," Richard said. "Pharmaceutical executive, board advisory member." Annie remembered the name from the program cards. Julian Cross had sponsored the pediatric oncology wing reception. His company's logo sat beside photographs of smiling children in the lobby. She had carried sparkling water to his table earlier. He had not looked at her once. Samuel said, "Where is Cross now?" The supervisor touched his radio, listened, and frowned. "He was at table 210 minutes ago. Current location unknown." Charles raised both hands slightly. "Now we're dragging donors into this?" Alvarez looked at him. "No, Mr. Whitaker. You are." Richard's phone buzzed. He ignored it. The technician at the monitor said, "Mr. Price." Ballroom cameras show Mr. Cross leaving through the south side door 2 minutes after the alarm started. "Alone?" Samuel asked. "With a woman. Looks like his assistant." "Where did they go?" The technician switched feeds. The screen showed a corridor outside the ballroom. Julian Cross moved quickly, still in his tuxedo, one hand gripping a leather folio. A younger woman in a cream jacket followed him, carrying a tablet and a small purse. They did not look panicked by the alarm. They looked busy. Samuel leaned toward the screen. "Track them." The feed changed. Julian and the assistant passed the donor coat check, turned toward the private meeting rooms, and disappeared through a door marked Board Hospitality. Richard's face darkened. That room has foundation documents, Charles said. Richard, donors keep personal belongings in those rooms. Julian may simply be retrieving. Stop, Richard said. One word. No anger in it. That made it worse. Alvarez pointed to two officers. Board hospitality, now. If Mr. Cross is destroying documents, stop him. If he wants to leave, he waits. The officers left. Annie's eyes stayed on Charles. He no longer looked at the door. He looked at the monitors, then the phones, then Richard. A man calculating distance, not innocence, Samuel noticed. Mr. Whitaker, sit down. I prefer to stand. I wasn't offering comfort. Charles stared at him. Am I being detained now? Alvarez answered. For the moment. Yes, Charles laughed once. On what grounds? Suspicion of involvement in an attempted poisoning, tampering with access credentials, and interfering with an active investigation. We can make it cleaner downtown if you prefer. Charles did not sit right away. Then he pulled out a chair and lowered himself into it with careful dignity, as if the chair had offended him. Naomi guided Annie back a step, away from him. The fire alarm cut off suddenly. The absence of sound made the room feel exposed. From far away came the muffled noise of the ballroom, hundreds of guests being held between confusion and rumor. Richard looked toward the wall as if he could see them through it. They're going to start asking questions, Samuel said. They already are. Let them. Charles looked up. Richard, if you say one word out there before counsel arrives, you'll damage the foundation for years. Richard turned to him. The foundation may already be damaged. You don't know that. I know someone tried to kill me before I signed an audit. Charles leaned forward. And you think public panic helps sick children? You think humiliating donors helps families who need treatment? Richard's face tightened at that. Charles knew where to press. Annie could see it. The room could too. He was not pleading for himself. He was hiding behind the children. Then Naomi spoke. My daughter was serving wine at a fundraiser for sick children, she said. Somebody used that same fundraiser to hide murder. Don't put those children in your mouth now. No one interrupted her. Richard looked at Naomi for a long second. You're right. Charles looked away. The officers returned with Julian Cross between them. He was in his early 60s, silver-haired, heavy-set, with a red face and a gold watch. His assistant followed, pale and shaking. One officer carried the leather folio. Another held the tablet. Julian spoke before anyone asked him anything. This is outrageous, Richard. I've supported your foundation for 8 years. Richard looked at the folio. What's in the bag, Julian? Board materials, my own copies. Alvarez took the folio from the officer and opened it on the side table. Inside were printed wire summaries, vendor invoices, and a stack of pages with highlighted names. One page had been torn down the middle. Samuel moved beside her. These are internal foundation payment records. Julian's assistant began to cry. Julian snapped, Don't say anything, Dana. Alvarez looked at the young woman. Dana, look at me. Are you in danger? The assistant's lips trembled. She looked at Julian, then at Charles. Charles's face went still. Dana whispered, I didn't know about the wine. Julian closed his eyes. The sentence moved through the room like a match dropped on dry paper. Alvarez's voice stayed even. What did you know about? Dana covered her mouth with one hand. The invoices. The shell vendors. Mr. Cross said it was legal restructuring. Mr. Whitaker said the audit would ruin everything if Mr. Langford signed it Monday. Charles stood so fast the chair scraped backward. That is a lie. Samuel was already beside him. Sit down. Charles did not. For the first time that night, Richard looked truly hurt, not surprised. Hurt. Charles, he said quietly, tell me she's lying. Charles turned toward him, and for 1 second he looked like the man Richard had trusted for years. The man who had sat in board meetings, spoken at hospital openings, sent flowers after Richard's divorce, stood beside him in photographs while children cut ribbons with oversized scissors. Then the mask returned. You are making a catastrophic mistake, Charles said, because a server saw glue. Annie felt the room turn toward her again, but this time she did not shrink. No, she said, because you thought no one like me would notice. The words landed cleanly. Richard looked at the sealed wine on the table. then at Charles, then at Julian Cross and the trembling assistant. "Detective," Richard said, "what do you need from me?" Alvarez closed the folio. "Your cooperation, your security footage, your evidence logs, and for you not to warn anyone else before we do. You have it." Charles's voice dropped. Richard did not look at him. Alvarez nodded to the officers. "Separate them. Mr. Whitaker in the lounge, Mr. Cross in the conference room. Dana stays with me." As the officers moved, Charles turned once toward Annie. His expression was no longer polished. It was cold, stripped of manners. Naomi stepped closer to her daughter. Samuel saw the look and moved between them. Richard saw it too, and whatever pity had been left in him disappeared. The officers led Charles out. When the door closed, the room did not feel safe. Not yet, but it felt different. For the first time all night, the people with titles were no longer deciding what the truth was allowed to be. Detective Alvarez kept Dana Cross's assistant in the security room and asked everyone else to stop talking for 10 seconds. It was not a request. The room obeyed her because she had the tone of someone used to hearing lies for a living and measuring them by weight. Dana sat in the chair Charles had left behind. She was maybe 26, neatly dressed, hair pinned back, tablet still clutched against her chest as if it could protect her from the men whose papers she had carried. Her face had gone pale under the security room lights. Alvarez pulled a chair close, not across from Dana like an interrogator, but beside her at an angle. "Dana, I need you to listen carefully. You already said enough to make powerful people angry. That means we do this properly now. Do you want an attorney?" Dana looked at Julian through the glass window of the small conference room where officers had placed him. He was pacing, red-faced, one hand pressed to his forehead. "I didn't know about the wine," she said again. "I heard you," Alvarez said. "That wasn't my question." Dana swallowed. "I don't know if I need a lawyer," Samuel said. "Then assume you might." Alvarez gave him a brief look, not unfriendly, then turned back to Dana. "You can stop here, or you can tell me what you know with counsel present. I'm not here to trick you. But if there's evidence being destroyed, people in danger, or money stolen from a children's hospital, time matters." Dana looked down at the tablet in her hands. "Mr. Cross told me to delete a folder." Richard's face tightened. "What folder?" Alvarez asked. Dana unlocked the tablet with shaking fingers. "Vendor review. It was shared from Mr. Whitaker's office 2 weeks ago. Mr. Cross said it contained duplicate drafts that would confuse the auditors." "Did you delete it?" "I tried." Her voice dropped. But the tablet froze when the alarm went off. Samuel looked toward the technician. "Can you preserve it?" The technician reached for the tablet, then stopped and looked at Alvarez. She nodded. "Photograph the screen first, then airplane mode, then bag it. No browsing." The technician did exactly that. Annie watched the care with which adults now handled objects. The glass, the bottle, the phone, the tablet. All night, people had handled her like the disruption and things like the truth. Naomi stood beside her, arms folded. She had not sat since entering the room. Annie knew that posture. Her mother used it at grocery stores when a cashier overcharged her, at school offices when someone misplaced Annie's paperwork, at clinics when receptionists spoke too fast and assumed she would not ask questions. Richard turned to Samuel. "Where is Charles?" "In the VIP lounge with 2 officers. "Is he talking?" "No," Naomi said. "Men like that don't talk until they know what everybody else knows." Alvarez looked up. "Mrs. Brooks, you ever consider police work?" Naomi did not smile. "I considered rent." The answer was so plain that no one made light of it. The technician finished securing the tablet. "Detective, before I lock it down, there's a folder name visible on the screen. LCF Pediatric Supply Initiative Revised Vendor Map." Richard closed his eyes for 1 second. "That program buys equipment for the oncology and neonatal units," Dana whispered. "It wasn't just equipment." Alvarez leaned closer. "What does that mean?" Dana's eyes filled, but she forced herself to speak. "Some vendors were real, some weren't. Mr. Cross's companies sold supplies through middle vendors, then the foundation paid inflated invoices. The difference went into consulting accounts. Mr. Whitaker said it was how major donors were kept aligned." Richard looked as if she had struck him. "How long?" he asked. Dana looked at him. "I only saw files from the last 18 months. 18 months, Richard repeated. Annie heard the hurt behind the words. It was not only the money, it was the photographs on the walls, the speeches, the children in hospital gowns, the mothers thanking him in waiting rooms. If Dana was telling the truth, those moments had been used as cover. Samuel's radio crackled. "Mr. Price, the suspect is secured in lower security holding. ID found in his shoe. Name appears to be Victor Hale, not hotel staff. Any injuries?" 2 guards with eye irritation and bruises. Mrs. Carter refused medical. Annie looked up. "Mrs. Carter is okay?" The guard's voice came back with a hint of disbelief. "She says the coffee urn is worse than she is." Naomi let out the first breath that almost sounded like a laugh. Samuel said, "Keep Victor separated. No calls. Detective Alvarez will want him." Alvarez nodded. "I will." Richard looked toward the door. Beyond it, the gala still waited. 400 guests were somewhere between rumor and anger. The hospital board would be asking questions. Donors would be calling their attorneys. News crews would be trying to understand why police had entered through the north lobby during the largest charity event of the season. Charles had been right about one thing. This could damage the foundation for years, but silence would rot it from the inside. Richard turned to Alvarez. "Can I address the ballroom?" Samuel answered first. "Not wise." Alvarez said, "Depends what you say." Richard looked at Annie. "If I say nothing, what happens to her?" Annie blinked. "Me? Yes," Richard said. "If I say nothing tonight, if we move everyone out quietly, what does the room remember?" No one answered. Richard answered himself. "They remember a young black server interrupted a fundraiser. They remember inconvenience. They remember whispers. By morning, some will call it confusion. Some will call it attention, seeking. Some will say the foundation handled it privately because there was nothing there." Annie looked away. She did not want to need him to understand that. But he did. Naomi's voice was low. "That is usually how it goes." Richard nodded once, slowly. "Not tonight." Alvarez studied him. "You can tell them there is an active investigation, that no one should leave until cleared, and that your security team prevented a credible threat. Do not accuse specific people on a microphone, unless you want a legal war before sunrise." Richard looked toward the lounge where Charles had been taken. "What if the specific people are still trying to make calls?" Samuel said, "We've secured their phones. Phones are not the only way men like that send warnings." Alvarez stood. "Then we move now." "Samuel, keep evidence secured. I'll have officers cover the ballroom exits. Mr. Langford, you speak briefly. No names unless I clear them. Mrs. Brooks, Annie, you can stay here." "No," Annie said. Naomi turned to her. "Annie." Annie looked at the monitor, then at Richard. "If he tells them I warned him, I should be there." "You don't owe that room anything," Naomi said. "I know." Annie's voice was quieter now. "But I'm tired of rooms deciding what I meant after I leave." Naomi stared at her daughter. Pride and fear crossed her face at the same time, and neither won. Richard said, "You don't have to speak." "I know." Samuel frowned. "It's safer here." Annie glanced at the frozen image of Victor Hale, then at the door where Charles had been led away. It wasn't safe here either. No one had a good answer for that. Alvarez nodded once. "She stays behind me and beside her mother. No press questions, no side conversations." Naomi took Annie's hand. "You let go of me. I'll embarrass you worse than you embarrassed that ballroom." Annie almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." They left the security room in a tight group. Alvarez and 2 officers first, Richard behind them, Samuel close to his right, Naomi and Annie behind Samuel, 2 guards following. The service corridor had changed since Annie last walked it. Staff stood in clusters, whispering. Some looked at Annie with curiosity, some with respect, some with fear because fear always looked for a face to attach itself to. Mrs. Lillian Carter was near the kitchen door with an ice pack she refused to hold properly. She saw Annie and lifted her chin. "Stand in it," she said again. This time, Richard heard her. He looked from Lillian to Annie and seemed to understand that courage had not started in his ballroom. It had been taught in kitchens, buses, break rooms, church basements, and small apartments long before it reached him. At the ballroom doors, the noise grew. Guests were talking over one another. A board member demanded updates from a hotel executive. A woman complained about the alarm frightening her husband. A man asked whether valet service was still operating. The The jazz trio had packed their instruments but had not left. Alvarez spoke to the officers. "Seal the side exits." Quietly, Richard paused before entering. For the first time all night, he looked uncertain. Not afraid of death, afraid of truth. Samuel said, "You sure?" Richard looked back at Annie. "No," he said, "but she was." Then he opened the ballroom doors. The room turned toward him in waves. Conversations died row by row. Cameras lifted. Phones rose despite the guards, telling people to put them down. At the front, the glass podium still stood beneath the foundation banner, waiting for the speech Richard had planned to give about generosity, hope, and the future of children's medicine. That speech was gone now. Richard walked to the podium. Samuel placed the sealed wine glass and bottle on a small table beside him, visible to the room but untouched. Alvarez stood near the stage steps. Naomi and Annie stayed to one side, not hidden, not centered, just present. Richard looked out at the donors. "A few minutes ago," he said, "I was told not to drink this wine by someone most of us in this room would have walked past without remembering her name." A murmur started, then faded. Richard glanced toward Annie. "Her name is Annie Brooks," he said. Annie felt every eye find her. This time, she did not look down. For a moment, Richard let the name hang in the ballroom. Annie Brooks. It did not sound like a name the room had expected to remember. It was not printed on the program. It was not engraved on a donor plaque or stitched onto a reserved chair. It belonged to the young woman standing near the side of the stage with her mother's hand wrapped around hers, wearing a server's uniform and trying not to show that her legs still felt weak. A few guests turned to look at her. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked curious. A few looked annoyed, as if Richard had broken an agreement by making them see someone they had spent the evening not seeing. Richard placed one hand on the podium. "She told me not to drink the wine because she saw something wrong with the bottle," he said. "She saw what others missed. She saw what some of us were too comfortable to notice." A man near the front table stood. He was one of the hospital board members, his face tight, his wife tugging lightly at his sleeve. "Richard," he said, "should we be concerned for our safety?" Detective Alvarez stepped forward before the question became panic. "Everyone will remain calm and follow instructions from police and security. At this time, we believe the threat was directed at Mr. Langford. We are asking guests to stay in the ballroom until they are cleared to leave." That did not calm the room. It only gave fear a shape. Voices rose. "Directed at him? What threat? Are we locked in? Is this about the alarm?" Richard raised his hand. But unlike earlier in the evening, the room did not quiet at once. Money did not like being frightened. Power did not like being told to wait. Samuel moved closer to the podium and spoke without a microphone. "Sit down, please, all of you." It was the please that made it work. Not soft, not pleading, just final. Chairs scraped. People sat. Phones stayed in hands, though several guests lowered them when Alvarez's officers began moving along the walls. Richard looked at the sealed glass on the small table beside him. The red wine had not changed. That bothered him. He wanted it to look evil now. He wanted poison to announce itself. Instead, it sat there like any expensive thing, polished by light and assumption. "The wine intended for me was not the bottle that was cleared by hotel service," Richard said. "The original bottle is still secured in the wine room. This bottle was brought through an internal service hallway by a man who was not assigned to this event." A woman gasped. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God." Richard continued, "That man has been detained." Several people turned toward the ballroom doors. Charles Whitaker was not in the room, but Annie felt him everywhere. In the donor tables, in the foundation banner, in the silence around the word audit, in the way some board members looked at one another without moving their heads. A reporter near the back lifted her phone higher. Alvarez pointed at her. "Recording stops now," the detective said. "This is an active investigation." "I'm press," the woman replied. "And I'm police." The phone lowered. Richard glanced toward Alvarez, then back to the guests. "I will not discuss every detail tonight, but I will say this clearly. The young woman who interrupted this gala did not ruin it. She may have saved my life." The room went still again. Annie felt her mother's hand tighten. At table 2, a man with silver hair stood slowly. "Richard, are you saying someone tried to kill you here?" In front of all of us? Richard looked at the sealed glass. Yes. The word landed harder than an explanation could have. A woman near the center began crying softly. Her husband put an arm around her, though his eyes stayed fixed on the wine. A doctor from the hospital board removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Two donors who had been whispering stopped at once. Then Julian Cross shouted from the side entrance, "This is insane." Everyone turned. Two officers were bringing him through the ballroom toward a side holding area because the conference room route had become crowded with staff and police. His tuxedo jacket hung open, and his face was flushed with anger. "I have donated millions to this foundation," Julian snapped. "Millions. And now I'm being dragged around like a criminal because some girl carrying drinks made a scene?" Naomi moved before Annie could. She stepped half a pace in front of her daughter, not blocking her completely, just enough to remind the room that Annie was not alone. Richard's voice turned cold. "Do not speak about her that way." Julian laughed. "You're losing control of your own event." "No," Richard said. "I lost control before tonight. That is why this happened." That answer confused Julian. It also quieted him for half a second. Detective Alvarez nodded to the officers. "Keep moving." But Julian stopped and pointed toward the podium. "You want truth? Fine. Tell them about the audit, Richard. Tell them how you were about to throw the foundation into chaos because you suddenly decided you didn't trust the people who built it." Richard did not flinch. Charles had been careful. Julian was not. Fear made him loud. The board members heard the word audit. So did the donors. So did Annie. A murmur rolled across the room. Richard leaned toward the microphone. "Yes. I was scheduled to sign an independent audit order Monday morning. That changed the room more than the word poison had. Poison was dramatic. Audit was personal. Audit meant records, signatures, names, committees, approvals, people who had sat at dinner together and called each other friends." Richard went on. "That audit will still happen. It will begin tonight." A woman from the board stood. "Richard, surely we should meet first." "No." She blinked. "No? No," Richard said. "For too long, I let meetings replace judgment. I let titles replace trust. I let men in good suits tell me everything was fine because it was easier than looking myself." His eyes moved briefly toward Annie. Tonight, someone without a title saw the truth first. The ballroom had no answer for that. From the side, one of Alvarez's officers approached the detective and spoke quietly. Alvarez listened, then turned toward Richard. "Mr. Langford," she said, "we have preliminary confirmation from the field test." Richard's face did not change, but Annie saw his hand close around the edge of the podium. Alvarez kept her voice low enough that only those near the stage heard. "The wine contains an unknown additive. Lab will confirm composition, but it should not be consumed under any circumstances." Richard nodded once. Julian heard enough. "Field test? You're making accusations based on a field test?" Alvarez looked at him. "No, Mr. Cross. We're building probable cause based on a switched bottle, falsified access, tampered footage, a detained suspect, financial records, witness statements, and now a contaminated drink. The lab is just going to make the paperwork heavier." A few people in the room stared at her. Annie nearly did too. Julian's mouth opened, then closed. The officers moved him out. Richard remained at the podium, but his planned speech was gone forever. No polished line about hope could survive beside the sealed glass. He looked over the crowd again. His voice dropped, and because of that, people leaned in. "Many of you came tonight to be generous," he said. "Some came to be seen being generous. I know the difference because I have been guilty of both." No one laughed. "The foundation carries my name. That means its failures carry my name too. If money meant for children was stolen, if trust was used as cover, if a man or woman in this room knew and stayed silent, then we will find it. Not quietly, not comfortably, not after people have had time to clean their desks." A board member whispered, "This will destroy us." Richard heard him. "No," he said. "What destroys us is needing a server to risk her job before any of us asked why a bottle came through the wrong door." Annie looked down then, not from shame, but because the room had become too much. Her mother leaned closer. "You all right?" Naomi whispered. "No," Annie whispered back. "That's honest." Annie almost smiled. Richard turned from the microphone and looked toward Samuel. "Start clearing guests by table. Police first." Then security. No one from the board, foundation office, vendor teams, or major donor staff leaves without speaking to Detective Alvarez. Samuel nodded. The ballroom reacted with anger, fear, and reluctant obedience. Officers began at the exits. Guests reached for coats and phones. Conversations restarted in sharp fragments. Annie thought it was over for the moment. Then a waiter near the rear doors shouted, "Hey!" A woman screamed. On the far side of the ballroom, one of the side doors burst open. Victor Hale, hands cuffed in front of him but one shoulder free from a guard's grip, slammed into the room hard enough to knock over a chair. Blood marked his lip. His eyes searched the ballroom with animal speed. Not for Richard, for Annie. Naomi pulled her back. Samuel moved first, but Victor was already running between tables, dragging one officer with him for 3 steps before breaking loose. Annie heard glass shatter. She heard Richard shout her name. She saw Victor's silver ring flash under the chandelier as he reached into his sleeve for something small and dark. And for the second time that night, the entire gala understood that the danger had never left the room. Victor did not get far. Samuel Price crossed the space between the stage and the first row with the speed of a younger man and the judgment of an older one. He did not chase where Victor wanted him to chase. He cut across the aisle, shoulder low, eyes on the hand reaching into the sleeve. "Down," Samuel shouted. Naomi pulled Annie behind the side of the stage. Richard stepped away from the podium, but Detective Alvarez caught his arm. "Stay back," she snapped. Victor yanked the small, dark object free. It was not a gun. It was a capped vial, no bigger than a tube of hotel shampoo, held tight between 2 fingers. For half a second, the room did not understand what it was. Then Samuel hit Victor from the side, driving him into a table set with untouched dessert plates. China cracked. Coffee cups jumped. A woman screamed and stumbled backward into her husband's chair. The vial flew from Victor's hand. Annie saw it spin across the white tablecloth, hit the edge of a bread plate, and drop toward the floor. "Don't touch it," she shouted. A guest bent down by instinct, then froze with his hand inches from it. Alvarez drew her weapon but held fire. There were too many people behind Victor, too many bodies, too much panic. "Hands where I can see them." Victor twisted under Samuel, trying to roll off the broken plates. One of his cuffs had slipped forward, giving him just enough room to fight. He drove his elbow into Samuel's ribs. Samuel grunted but did not let go. 2 officers rushed in. One grabbed Victor's wrist. The other pinned his shoulder. Victor kicked, caught a chair leg, and sent the chair scraping across the floor. "Annie," Naomi said, gripping her daughter's arm. "I'm here." "Then stay here." But Annie's eyes were on the vial under the table. It had landed near the toe of a guest's polished shoe. The man was trembling, frozen between fear and the old habit of not making a scene. "Sir," Annie called to him, keeping her voice steady because terror spread faster when spoken badly. "Step back. Slowly. Don't kick it." The man looked at her. He was older, with white hair and a red pocket square. Earlier that evening, he had snapped his fingers at a server for more ice. Now he obeyed Annie as if she were the only person in the room who understood the floor beneath him. He stepped back. Alvarez saw the vial. "Evidence team." Now, Samuel and the officers forced Victor onto his stomach. One officer locked a second restraint around his ankles. Victor stopped fighting only when Samuel pressed his forearm across the back of his neck and said something too low for the microphones to catch. Whatever it was, Victor understood it. The ballroom remained standing but silent. No music. No polite coughing. No clink of glasses. Only Victor's harsh breathing and the faint buzz of the microphone Richard had left on at the podium. Alvarez holstered her weapon and knelt near the vial without touching it. "What is it?" Richard asked from behind her. "Could be more of whatever went into the wine," she said. "Could be something else." Victor laughed into the carpet. There was blood on his teeth. "You people still think the wine was the whole job?" Samuel looked down at him. "Then talk." Victor turned his face enough for one eye to find Annie. "She talks enough for everybody." Naomi moved before anyone else. She stepped between Victor and Annie with the kind of calm that did not ask permission. "You look at me," Naomi said. Victor's smile weakened. "You want to scare somebody," she continued. "Try a grown woman." One of the officers pulled Victor upright to his knees. Samuel removed a folded napkin from a nearby table and wiped his own hand where wine and blood had smeared across it. His face was hard now. Alvarez stood. "Victor Hale, you are under arrest for attempted murder, assault, evidence tampering, and whatever else the lab and the district attorney decide to add by morning." Victor spat red onto the carpet. "You'll need more than a waitress." Richard spoke from the stage. His voice was quiet, but the microphone carried it. "We have more." Victor's head turned. Richard stepped down from the stage despite Alvarez's sharp look. He did not come too close. He stopped beside Annie and Naomi, where everyone in the ballroom could see him standing not at the donor table, not beside the board, but beside the young woman who had warned him. "We have the bottle," Richard said. "We have the glass. We have the original wine still sealed in the wine room. We have the footage. We have the badge logs. We have the towel. We have the phone you dropped. We have the call." Victor's face shifted at the last word. Richard saw it. Samuel saw it too. Alvarez stepped closer to Victor. "Who paid you?" Victor looked away. Alvarez said, "Let me help you understand where you are. The man you tried to kill is alive. The witness is alive. The evidence is preserved. If someone promised you this would look like a heart attack and disappear by morning, they lied to you. So ask yourself whether you want to spend the rest of your life protecting a man who is already preparing to call you the only criminal in the room." Victor's jaw worked. Charles was not in the ballroom, but his absence had weight. Julian Cross had gone still at the side of the room, held by two officers near a column. His face had lost all color. Victor looked at Julian. Just once. It was enough. Alvarez followed the glance. "Mr. Cross, don't move." Julian's mouth opened. "I didn't." "Don't," Richard said. That one word stopped him. Victor laughed again, but now it sounded tired. Cross didn't have the stomach for details. Julian shouted, "Shut up." The ballroom heard him. Charles Whitaker, brought in through the side door by two officers at that exact moment, heard him too. His eyes went first to Victor, then to Julian, then to Richard. Not once did he look at Annie. Alvarez turned. "Bring Mr. Whitaker here." Charles walked as if he were entering a board meeting, not being escorted by police. His bow tie was still straight. His hair had not moved. "What is this?" he asked. "Public theater?" Richard faced him. "No. Consequences." Charles's gaze flicked to the sealed evidence on the side table, to the vial now guarded by an officer, to Victor on his knees, to Julian trembling near the column. Then, finally, he looked at Annie. "You have no idea what you've done," he said. Naomi answered before Annie could. "She told the truth. That's what bothers you." Charles's mouth tightened. "Truth? You think this room runs on truth? This foundation runs on money. Hospitals run on money. Research runs on money. Children get treated because men like Julian Cross write checks while people like Richard pretend not to know where the checks come from." Richard's face changed, not with surprise but with pain. Charles turned on him. "You wanted the audit because you wanted to feel clean. You wanted to wash your hands after years of letting us build the machine for you." Richard took a step closer. "You stole from sick children. I protected the foundation. You tried to have me killed." Charles's eyes sharpened. "I tried to stop you from burning down what we built." The words hung there. No denial, no mistake, no misunderstanding. Alvarez looked at the officers. "That's enough. Cuff him." Charles seemed to realize, 1 second too late, what he had said in front of witnesses, donors, board members, police, and cameras he had not been able to control. His face closed, but the room had already heard him. An officer took his arm. Charles resisted just enough to make the cuffs necessary. The click was small, but in that ballroom it sounded final. Julian began talking then, fast and useless. It was Charles. Charles handled the vendor. Charles said the audit would ruin everything. "I never told anyone to poison." Alvarez pointed at him. "Save it." Victor laughed from the floor. "Now everybody tells the truth." Samuel looked at him. "Some people started earlier." He glanced at Annie. The room followed his gaze. Annie did not want the attention. Her hands were cold. Her stomach was tight. Her uniform sleeve had a small stain near the cuff, and one of her shoes had begun to hurt from standing too long. She did not feel brave. She felt tired. Richard turned back to the microphone. "This gala is over," he said. "The investigation is not. No one leaves until cleared by police. Every record of this foundation will be opened. Every vendor contract, every donor-linked payment, every account carrying my name. A board member stood halfway. "Richard, be careful." Richard looked at him. "I should have been careful years ago." No one replied. He looked toward the hospital banner above the stage, where photographs of children smiled down at a room full of adults who had almost let money explain everything. Then he looked at Annie. "Miss Brooks," he said, and the formality made the room listen differently. "I owe you my life. But more than that, I owe you the fact that this room heard the truth while there was still time to do something about it." Annie did not know what to say, so she said the only thing that felt honest. "My mother taught me to pay attention." Naomi closed her eyes for a moment. Somewhere in the back of the ballroom, Mrs. Lillian Carter began to clap. Not loudly at first. One firm clap, then another. A few servers joined her. Then one of the nurses from the hospital table. Then a doctor. Then, slowly, awkwardly, some of the donors stood too. It was not the clean applause of a successful fundraiser. It was uneasy, ashamed, human. Annie looked at the faces before her. Some still did not know what to do with her. Some would forget the lesson by morning, but not all of them. Richard stepped away from the podium as Alvarez's officers led Charles out, then Julian, then Victor. The sealed glass remained under guard. The vial was bagged. The bottle that had never reached his mouth sat in evidence. No longer a symbol of celebration, but of how close death could come when wrapped in elegance. Naomi put an arm around Annie's shoulders. "You ready to go home?" she whispered. Annie looked toward the service doors, then toward the front entrance beyond the ballroom. For the first time that night, she did not know which door she was supposed to use. Richard seemed to understand. He said quietly, "Mrs. Brooks, Annie, when you're ready, my driver will take you home through the front." Naomi looked at him. "We'll accept the ride, not because we need saving." Richard nodded. "I understand." "No," Naomi said. "You're starting to." Richard accepted that. Outside the ballroom, the city of Chicago kept moving along the river, unaware that inside one hotel, a girl carrying a tray had stopped a death, exposed a betrayal, and forced a room full of powerful people to listen. The ride home did not happen right away. By the time the first guests were cleared to leave, the ballroom had lost the shape of a gala. The white tablecloths were stained with coffee, wine, and water from overturned glasses. Dessert plates sat untouched. Donation cards lay scattered near purses and programs. A few flower arrangements had been pushed aside to make room for evidence markers. The banner for Langford Children's Foundation still hung above the stage, but no one looked at it with pride now. Annie sat with Naomi in a small sitting area near the north lobby while Detective Alvarez finished the first round of statements. Samuel had placed 2 guards nearby, not close enough to crowd them, but close enough that Annie could feel watched in a different way than before. Earlier that evening, people had watched her because she was out of place. Now they watched because someone had tried to make her disappear. Naomi had taken off her grocery store jacket and folded it across her lap. Her work shirt underneath was wrinkled from the bus ride and the rush across town. Annie noticed a small tear near her mother's sleeve cuff and felt a sudden ache of guilt. "You missed dinner," Annie said. Naomi looked at her. "You almost watched a man get poisoned. Don't worry about my dinner. I just mean you worked all day, and I'm still your mother after work." Annie looked down at her hands. There was a faint red mark across her palm where the tray handle had pressed too long. She rubbed it with her thumb. Naomi saw it. "You hurt?" "No, it's nothing. That's not what I asked." Annie let her mother take her hand. Naomi turned it over, inspected it as if Annie were still 6 years old and had fallen on the sidewalk outside their apartment. "You held on hard," Naomi said. "I was scared I'd drop it." "The tray?" Annie shook her head. "My nerve." Naomi's face softened, but only for a moment. "You didn't." Across the lobby, Richard stood with Detective Alvarez near a brass lamp, speaking quietly. He had removed his bow tie. Without it, he looked less like the man from the program card and more like someone who had aged several years between dinner and midnight. Samuel stood beside him, holding a folder now thick with printed logs, photographs, and evidence receipts. Annie watched them because she could not help it. That was the trouble with learning to notice. Once the habit lived inside you, it did not go quiet just because you were tired. Charles Whitaker had been taken out through a service exit in handcuffs, though not before reporters in the lobby caught enough to start shouting questions. Julian Cross had followed 10 minutes later, red-faced and silent, with his assistant Dana, walking separately beside Detective Alvarez's partner. Victor Hale left last, restrained at wrists and ankles, his head lowered. He did not look at Annie again. She was grateful for that. A hotel employee in a black blazer approached with a paper cup of coffee and a bottle of water. He offered the coffee to Naomi first. "Ma'am," he said, "I thought you might want this." Naomi looked at him for a long second, perhaps measuring whether kindness had arrived late or on purpose. Then she took the water instead. "Thank you," she said. The man nodded to Annie. "Miss Brooks, can I get you anything?" Miss Brooks, not you, not server, not girl. Annie almost did not recognize herself in the words. "No thank you," she said. When he left, Naomi watched him cross the lobby. Amazing what nearly dying can teach a room about manners. Annie let out a tired laugh, then pressed her hand over her mouth because it felt wrong to laugh after everything. Naomi squeezed her hand. "Laugh if it comes. Cry if it comes. Just don't swallow everything to make other people comfortable." Richard finished speaking with Alvarez and came toward them. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Mrs. Brooks, Annie." Naomi looked up. "Mr. Langford, Detective Alvarez will need formal statements tomorrow. Samuel will arrange transportation if you're willing." Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly. "Willing?" Richard accepted the correction. "If you agree, we'll come," Naomi said. "But I want to know what happens after tonight. Not with your foundation, with my daughter." Richard nodded. He had expected that question, or maybe he had feared it. "Samuel's team will stay near your building tonight. Discreetly. No one will bother you. If you prefer a hotel room under another name, I can arrange that." Naomi shook her head. "We're going home." Annie looked at her quickly. "Mama, we are going home," Naomi repeated. But her voice was not stubborn. It was tired pride. "I won't have men like Charles Whitaker decide we have to run from our own door," Richard said. "Then my driver will take you. Samuel will follow behind." Naomi studied him. "And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow, we make sure the police have everything. Then I begin a full audit. Publicly." Naomi stood, folding her jacket over one arm. "That is between you and your conscience." Richard did not defend himself. "Yes." The answer seemed to surprise her. Maybe it surprised him too. Annie rose beside her mother. Her knees still felt strange, but she could stand. Richard looked at her as if he wanted to say something important and did not know which words would not sound like charity. "Finally," he said, "when you stood in that ballroom, I warned you there would be a price if you were wrong." Annie remembered. The whole room had enjoyed hearing it. "Yes, sir. You were not wrong," he said. "But there may still be a price. People with money do not always lose quietly. I am sorry for that." Naomi's expression changed. "Sorry doesn't cover danger." "No," Richard said. "It doesn't." Samuel joined them, carrying a plain envelope. "Car is ready at the front." Naomi took Annie's arm, but Richard spoke once more. "Annie, may I ask you something?" She nodded. "Why did you notice the seal?" Annie looked toward the ballroom doors. Police were still moving in and out. Staff had begun clearing tables under instruction, setting aside anything marked as evidence. Mrs. Lillian Carter stood near the entrance, giving directions to two younger servers like a general after a battle. "Because Mrs. Carter showed me what it was supposed to look like," Annie said. "And because people change when they think no one is watching." Richard's eyes lowered briefly. "Your mother taught you that?" Annie glanced at Naomi. "Yes." Naomi did not smile, but there was something close to it in her eyes. Outside, the night air hit Annie's face cold and clean. The hotel's front entrance was lined with black cars, camera crews, police vehicles, and guests waiting for valet service with the stunned impatience of people who had expected an elegant evening and received a memory they could not easily explain. A few reporters turned when they saw Richard. Questions came at once. "Mr. Langford, was there an assassination attempt? Who was arrested? Is the foundation under investigation? Who is the young woman?" Samuel's guards formed a line, but Richard did not rush. He looked at the cameras, then at Annie and Naomi. "No questions for them," he said. "Not tonight." One reporter called, "Did she save your life?" Richard stopped. Annie wished he would keep walking. He said, "Yes." Only one word, but cameras caught it. Guests heard it. Hotel staff heard it. Annie heard it in a way that made her want to hide and stand taller at the same time. The driver opened the rear door of a black sedan. Naomi got in first, then Annie. The seat smelled faintly of leather and wintergreen mints. Annie had never been inside a car like that. She sat carefully, afraid to touch too much. Richard leaned slightly toward the open door, still outside. Samuel will follow. Detective Alvarez has my direct number. If anything feels wrong tonight, call him first, then the police. Naomi said, "We know how to call police." Richard nodded. "I know." "No," Naomi said gently but firmly. "You know now." He accepted that too. The door closed. The car pulled away from the hotel, past the cameras, past the flower planters, past the front entrance Annie had never used before that night. For several blocks, neither Annie nor Naomi spoke. Chicago moved around them in pieces of light. Traffic signals, late buses, apartment windows, steam rising from a manhole, the river catching the glow of buildings that seemed to belong to another country than the one Annie lived in. In the front seat, the driver kept his eyes on the road and said nothing. Naomi broke the silence first. "You did right." Annie stared out the window. "I was scared the whole time." "I didn't say you weren't scared. I said you did right." Annie's eyes burned. "What if he comes after us? What if Charles has people? What if I ruined your job chances? What if—" Naomi reached across the seat and took her hand. One fear at a time, Annie wiped at her face quickly, angry that the tears had waited until she was in a rich man's car to show up. "I don't want to be on the news," she whispered. "Then we don't feed them more than they need. I don't want people at school looking at me. They already look at you. Let them learn to do it with respect." Annie looked at her mother then. Naomi's face was tired, the lines around her mouth deeper than they had been that morning. But her eyes were steady. "Were you scared?" Annie asked. Naomi looked out at the city. "From the second they called me, you didn't look scared. That's because you needed a mother, not a mirror." The words stayed with Annie the rest of the ride. When they reached their apartment building on the south side, Samuel's vehicle parked half a block behind them. Another plain car pulled in across the street. The driver opened the door, but Naomi stepped out before he could help her. She thanked him anyway. Their building looked the same as it had that morning. Brick worn by weather, 2 porch lights out, a small grocery bag caught near the fence. Mrs. Alvarez from the second floor watching from behind her curtain. Home did not become safer just because powerful men had promised things, but it was still home. Inside the apartment, Naomi locked the door, then checked it twice. Annie set her serving shoes by the mat. Her feet ached when she stood barefoot on the kitchen tile. On the table sat the morning's mail, an unpaid electric bill, and the half loaf of bread Naomi had left wrapped in plastic. The ordinary sight of it nearly broke Annie more than the ballroom had. Naomi filled the kettle. "Tea?" Annie nodded. While the water heated, Naomi took Annie's black server jacket from her hands and hung it over the back of a chair. A faint wine stain marked one cuff. Naomi touched it with her thumb. "This can be washed," she said. Annie sat at the small table. "Can tonight?" Naomi did not answer quickly. She placed 2 mugs on the table, then sat across from her daughter. "No," she said. "Oh, can be used." Annie looked at her. Naomi's voice was low. "Some nights don't leave you, so you decide whether they make you smaller or sharper." Outside, a car rolled slowly down the block. Annie stiffened. Naomi listened, then said, "Samuel's people." Annie breathed out. For a while, they sat with their tea untouched. Mother and daughter in a small kitchen after a night of chandeliers, poison, police, and applause that had sounded too late to be clean. Then Naomi reached across the table and covered Annie's hand. "You are not invisible," she said. Annie looked down. For the first time all night, she let herself cry. Morning did not make the story smaller. By 7 o'clock, Annie's face was on television. Naomi turned the volume down before the anchor finished saying Richard Langford's name, but not before Annie heard the words, "part-time server," "attempted poisoning," and foundation scandal stitched together like they belonged in the same breath. The screen showed the front of the Harrington Grand Hotel, blue police lights reflecting off the glass doors, then a blurred clip of Richard outside the entrance telling reporters one word, "Yes." "Did she save your life?" "Yes." Annie stood in the kitchen doorway wearing sweatpants and an old-school hoodie, her hair wrapped in a scarf, her eyes swollen from a sleep that had not lasted long enough to count. On the table, Naomi had set out toast, scrambled eggs, and sliced oranges she had bought on sale 2 days earlier. The food looked too normal for the morning after a man had been let out in handcuffs because Annie noticed glue on a wine bottle. Naomi clicked the television off. "You need to eat." "I'm not hungry." "You don't have to be hungry to eat." Annie sat because her mother was not asking. Across the street, one of Samuel's men sat in a parked sedan, reading a newspaper he had not turned in 15 minutes. Another car waited near the corner. The sight should have made Annie feel safe. Instead, it reminded her that danger had followed them home, even if it had done so politely. Naomi poured coffee for herself and tea for Annie. "Detective Alvarez called at 6:30. She wants us downtown at 10. Annie rubbed her thumb over the side of the mug. "Do I have to say everything again?" "Yes. What if I forget something?" "You tell what you remember. Not more, not less." That sounded simple. It was not. Annie could still see the ballroom when she closed her eyes. The glass. Victor's ring. Charles's face when the extension number was read aloud. Richard saying her name into a microphone. The applause. She had not known applause could feel heavy. A knock came at the door at 9:05. Naomi looked through the peephole before unlocking it. Samuel Price stood in the hall, wearing a dark overcoat and holding a paper bag from a bakery. "I know you've eaten," he said, lifting the bag slightly, "but people answer questions better with muffins around." Naomi looked at him. "You bring pastries to all your witnesses?" "No, ma'am. Only the ones who saved my employer from drinking poison." Annie almost smiled. Samuel placed the bag on the counter but did not step too far inside. He had the sense to understand that their home was not another room Richard Langford owned. "Car's downstairs when you're ready," he said. "Detective Alvarez will take your formal statement. There may be an assistant district attorney present. You can ask for breaks. You can ask to speak to your mother privately. You do not guess. If you don't know, say you don't know." Annie nodded. "Is Victor talking?" Samuel's face stayed still, but his eyes changed. "Some." Naomi caught it. "What does some mean?" "It means he has admitted he was hired to switch the bottle. He claims he did not know the full financial motive." "That may be true. Men like that are paid not to ask." "Did he say Charles hired him?" "He said payment came through a shell company tied to a consultant tied to Julian Cross's network. He also said Charles gave the timing." Naomi folded her arms. "So yes." Samuel's mouth almost moved. "In plain language, yes." Annie looked at the table. "And Charles? Lawyered up before midnight." Naomi said, "Of course he did. Julian Cross is trying to separate himself from Charles." Samuel continued. "Dana is cooperating. The tablet matters. So do the invoices." Annie looked up. "What happens to the hospital?" Samuel did not answer quickly. "That is what Richard is trying to find out." The drive downtown took them along streets Annie knew, and then streets that seemed made for people who had never waited on buses in winter. At police headquarters, Detective Alvarez met them herself. She did not make Annie sit in the crowded waiting area. She brought them to a small interview room with beige walls, a metal table, and a box of tissues set where everyone could see it but no one had to acknowledge it. The assistant district attorney was a woman named Karen Whitcomb, late 50s. Gray hair cut short, reading glasses hanging from a chain. She shook Annie's hand, and then Naomi's. "Miss Brooks," she said, "I've read the preliminary notes. I want you to know something before we begin. You are not here because you caused trouble. You are here because you prevented a crime from being completed." Annie swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." The statement took nearly 3 hours. Annie told the story from the service entrance forward. She described the wine route, the seal, the glue, Patrick Wells's name, Victor's walk, the silver ring, the phone call, the words about the toast and the audit. Alvarez asked the same questions in different ways, not to trap her, but to make sure the truth stayed the same under pressure. Naomi sat beside her the whole time, quiet except when Annie's voice thinned and she said, "Take a breath." At one point, Whitcomb asked, "Why did you check the log?" Annie looked at her hands. "Because the bottle looked almost right." "Almost right?" "Yes, ma'am. Sometimes that's worse than wrong. Wrong announces itself. Almost right wants you to look away." The ADA wrote that down. When it was over, Alvarez turned off the recorder and leaned back. You did well. Annie felt no triumph, only exhaustion. Do I have to testify? Probably, Whitcomb said. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually, yes, Naomi asked. Against all three? Most likely. Victor Hale, Charles Whitaker, and Julian Cross. There may be additional charges as the financial investigation expands. Annie closed her eyes briefly. Alvarez's voice softened. We'll walk you through it. When that time comes. When they left the interview room, Richard Langford was waiting in the hallway. He stood near a vending machine with 2 untouched cups of coffee in his hands, looking out of place in a navy suit that probably cost more than everything in Annie's living room. Samuel stood a few feet away, speaking to a uniformed officer. Richard turned when he saw them. Naomi's face tightened. Mr. Langford, Mrs. Brooks, Annie. He looked at them carefully, as if trying not to take up too much space. I didn't want to interrupt your statement. Then why are you here? Naomi asked. Richard accepted the edge in her voice. Because the Foundation's board is meeting at noon. Before I walk into that room, I wanted to tell you what I'm going to say. Annie said nothing. Richard looked tired. The audit begins today, not Monday, today. I am asking the State Attorney General's office to review the Foundation's records. I am freezing all discretionary vendor payments. I am removing Charles from all authority, pending formal action. Julian Cross's companies are suspended from every program connected to us. Naomi watched him. That's business. Yes, Richard said. It is. What about people? He nodded slowly, as if he had expected the question and still felt it land. Every hospital program that may have been affected will be funded from my personal accounts until the audit is complete. No child loses care because men stole money in my name. Naomi's expression did not soften, but she stopped leaning away from him. Richard turned to Annie. And your job at the hotel is safe. Mr. Grayson is no longer supervising the event staff pending review. Annie looked up. You called the hotel? Yes. I didn't ask you to. I know. The answer hung there. Annie was too tired to decide whether it bothered her. Richard continued. I also told them if any worker is punished for cooperating with police, the Foundation will never hold another event there. Naomi said, that part I like. Richard almost smiled. Then he looked down at the coffee cups as if realizing he had been holding them too long. I owe you both more than announcements in a hallway. But I also understand owing is not the same as buying. Naomi's eyes sharpened. Good. Richard looked at Annie. Last night, before I knew you were right, I told you there would be a price if you were wrong. Annie remembered the room going quiet around those words. She nodded. I said that from the place I have lived most of my life, Richard said. A place where interruption feels like disrespect because no one has ever had to interrupt to be heard. I was wrong to speak to you that way. Annie did not know what to do with the apology. It did not erase the moment, but it did not sound empty either. Thank you, she said. Naomi looked at her daughter, then at Richard. Apologies are good when they learn to walk. Richard lowered his head once. Then I'll let this one start. Samuel stepped closer, cars ready. As they moved toward the exit, a television mounted high on the wall showed breaking news without sound. Charles Whitaker's photograph appeared beside Julian Cross's. Beneath them, a headline scrolled about the Langford Foundation investigation. Then, for half a second, the footage changed to Annie outside the hotel. Her face turned away from the cameras, Naomi beside her. Annie stopped. Naomi followed her gaze and reached for her hand. Richard saw the screen too. I can ask them to blur your face. Alvarez, walking behind them, said, Not completely. Not now. But we can limit future exposure and warn outlets she is a witness. Annie stared at herself on the screen. She looked smaller than she had felt in the ballroom, younger than 18, and much more afraid than the news would ever understand. I don't want to be famous, she said. Naomi squeezed her hand. Then don't be. Be truthful. Let other people call it what they need to. Outside headquarters, cold wind moved between the buildings. Samuel's car waited at the curb. Richard remained on the steps as Annie and Naomi walked down. Before getting in, Annie turned back. Mr. Langford? Yes? Don't just fix the papers. He looked at her. She searched for the right words. Fix the rooms too. Richard did not ask what she meant. Maybe by then he knew. The entrances, the silence, the way staff were spoken to, the way people with trays were trusted less than people with titles. I will, he said. Annie got into the car beside her mother. This time, when the door closed, she did not feel hidden. She felt carried into the next part of a story she had not asked for, but could no longer step out of. 3 weeks later, Annie learned that justice did not move like it did in movies. It did not arrive with one dramatic confession and a judge's gavel before breakfast. It came in phone calls, subpoenas, sealed envelopes, postponed hearings, men in expensive suits saying very little, and reporters standing outside buildings where ordinary people still had to walk through the front door. Charles Whitaker pleaded not guilty. Julian Cross pleaded not guilty. Victor Hale did not plead anything at first. His attorney asked for more time, then more time after that, while the district attorney's office stacked evidence into a case thick enough to bend a table. The lab confirmed the wine had been altered with a compound that could have stopped Richard Langford's heart and left behind little more than confusion. The vial Victor carried contained the same substance, stronger, concentrated, meant either for disposal or for one last desperate use. The towel carried trace residue. The reactivated badge led back to Charles's credentials. The broken phone led back to the Foundation Operations Suite. Dana's tablet opened a map of fake vendors, inflated invoices, and quiet payments that had moved through children's programs like termites through clean wood. Annie gave 2 more statements, then a third. Each time, Naomi came with her. Each time, Samuel Price waited nearby. Each time, Annie repeated what she had seen, not what other people wanted the story to become. No, she told one attorney when he asked if she had always suspected Charles Whitaker. I didn't know who he was. No, she told another when he asked if Richard Langford had encouraged her to accuse the man in the black suit. I stopped him before anyone believed me. Yes, she said when asked if she was frightened. Then she added, but being frightened doesn't make what I saw less true. That line appeared on television by evening. Naomi hated that. They take one sentence and dress it up like it belongs to them, she said, standing in their kitchen with a dish towel over one shoulder. Annie sat at the table with an application for community college financial aid open in front of her. I said it. Yes, but they didn't earn it. Annie did not answer. She had begun to understand that public attention was a kind of weather. You could carry an umbrella, but you could not stop it from falling. At the hotel, things changed in ways people could measure and ways they could not. Mr. Grayson was removed from event management after 3 staff members reported that he had ignored Annie's warning and tried to silence her. Mrs. Lillian Carter became acting staff liaison for all major events, a title she accepted only after telling the hotel general manager that a title without authority was just a name tag with better spelling. The Harrington Grand installed new access protocols, but Lillian told Annie the bigger change was smaller. They say good morning now, she said over the phone one Sunday afternoon. Who? People who used to walk past the dish station like it was a wall. Annie smiled into the receiver. That good? It's a start. Don't confuse a start with a finish. Richard Langford seemed to be learning the same lesson. The audit did not just bruise the foundation, it opened it. Charles had hidden stolen money inside programs no decent person wanted to question too closely. Pediatric equipment, rural clinic outreach, oncology support, emergency medication grants. Julian's companies had sold supplies through middle vendors that existed mostly on paper. Invoices were rounded, layered, renamed, and approved by people who had trusted Charles or feared looking difficult. Richard gave a public statement from the steps of Langford Children's Hospital with Detective Alvarez standing off to one side and no donor banner behind him. I signed too many things I did not read closely enough, he said. I trusted titles. I trusted polished reports. I trusted people who knew how to speak the language of charity while stealing from the children whose photographs hung behind us. That failure carries my name. A reporter asked if he was admitting legal responsibility. Richard looked tired. I'm admitting moral responsibility. My attorneys can survive the difference. The clip ran all day. Naomi watched it once, then turned off the television. That man's learning. Annie looked up from her textbook. You trust him now? Naomi took her time. Trust is not a light switch. It's a porch. People stand on it a while before you let them in. Richard did not ask to be let in. That was one reason Naomi began to respect him. He sent no giant check to their apartment. No cameras. No surprise gifts. Instead, a letter arrived through Samuel, written on plain cream paper, not foundation stationery. Richard asked if he could meet with them at the hospital, privately, to discuss what he called practical repair. Naomi read the letter twice. Practical repair, she said. Annie waited. Are we going? Naomi folded the letter. We'll hear him. Hearing is not accepting. The meeting happened in a small family room on the 3rd floor of Langford Children's Hospital. There were vending machines outside, a box of crayons on a low table, and a mural of Lake Michigan painted along one wall. A little boy with no hair slept in a stroller near the window while his grandmother rubbed his foot through a blanket. Richard arrived without Samuel entering first. Samuel stayed in the hallway, giving the room space. Annie noticed that. Richard carried a folder but did not open it right away. Mrs. Brooks, Annie, thank you for coming. Naomi sat with her purse on her lap. You said practical repair. I did. Then speak plainly. Richard nodded. The foundation is creating an independent worker protection policy for all events it funds or hosts. Staff can report safety concerns directly to security without going through managers like Grayson. Retaliation means termination of the vendor contract. Naomi listened. Richard continued. We are adding staff representatives to event safety briefings, not symbolic, voting authority. Mrs. Carter has agreed to serve for the hotel side. Annie smiled. She'll make people nervous. She already has, Richard said. Naomi did not smile, but her eyes warmed by a degree. Richard opened the folder. I am also establishing a scholarship fund for children of working families in Chicago. Not in your name unless you approve it. Not with your photograph. No speeches required. It will support students entering nursing, forensic science, social work, public safety, and hospital administration. Annie looked at him. Why those fields? Because that night I saw how many people keep others alive before a doctor ever enters the room. Naomi leaned back slightly. And what do you want from Annie? Nothing. That's a beautiful word, often untrue. Richard accepted it. I want her permission if the scholarship carries her name. If she says no, it won't. Annie looked at the folder but did not touch it. Her name on something sounded unreal. Worse, it sounded like becoming a symbol. And symbols belong to other people after a while. I don't want my face on brochures, she said. You won't. I don't want people saying I was brave like I wasn't scared. I won't say that. I don't want this to be about saving one rich man. Richard's face changed. Annie felt Naomi look at her, but she kept going. If you do it, make it for people who notice things and get ignored. Nurses, janitors, servers, bus drivers, the people, everyone walks past until something goes wrong. Richard closed the folder slowly. Then that is what it will be. Naomi studied him. Put that in writing too. I already did, Richard said, and turned one page toward her. This time Naomi almost smiled. Weeks became months. The case moved toward trial. Charles's lawyers tried to paint Annie as confused, pressured, influenced by Richard's security team. Detective Alvarez warned her it would happen. They'll make the truth stand in bad lighting, Alvarez said. Your job is not to look perfect. Your job is to stay accurate. Annie carried that with her into the preliminary hearing. The courtroom was colder than she expected. Charles sat at the defense table in a dark suit, looking smaller without the ballroom around him. Julian Cross sat 2 rows away with his own attorney. Victor Hale wore jail clothes and did not look at Annie. When Annie took the stand, her hands shook beneath the witness table. Naomi sat behind the prosecutor. Richard sat farther back, not in the front row, as if he had learned that being central was not always the same as being useful. The defense attorney asked Annie whether she had been trained in wine authentication. No, she said. Whether she had handled high-value Bordeaux before that evening. No. Whether she had perhaps misunderstood a service route because she was temporary. No. The attorney smiled. So you expect this court to believe that you, an 18-year-old part-time server, noticed what trained hotel staff, security personnel, and foundation executives did not. Annie looked at the attorney. Then she looked at Charles. Yes, she said. Because they weren't looking. The courtroom went still. The judge told the room to remain quiet, though no one had spoken. By the end of the hearing, the charges stood. Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, embezzlement, evidence, tampering. More would likely come. The trial would be months away, maybe longer, but the case was alive, and it would not be buried. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted again. Naomi kept one arm behind Annie's back, not pushing, just guiding. Richard waited near the steps. You did well, he said. Annie was too tired to be polite. I did what they asked. No, Richard said. You did what the truth required. Naomi looked at him. That sounds like something a man says after hiring better speechwriters. Richard smiled faintly. It was mine, unfortunately. Naomi gave a small nod. Then keep practicing. That evening, back home, Annie placed the scholarship papers beside her college forms. She still had not decided whether to let Richard use her name. Naomi did not rush her. Outside, the block was noisy in the normal way. A dog barking, music from a passing car, someone arguing near the corner store, children laughing too late for a school night. Life had not become easy. Bills still arrived, buses still ran late. Annie still woke some nights hearing the word audit in a stranger's voice. But something had shifted, not in the whole world. Annie was old enough to know better than that, but in one foundation. One hotel, one courtroom, one room at a time. Naomi set a cup of tea beside her. You thinking hard. I don't know if I want my name on it. Then don't decide tonight. What would you do? Naomi sat across from her. I'd ask whether the name helps the work or feeds the pride. Annie touched the edge of the folder. What if it does both? Then make sure the work eats first. A week later, Annie called Richard. He answered himself. Annie, you can use my name, she said, but no picture, no gala, no big speech. Understood. And the first scholarships should go to workers' kids from the hospital, the hotel, and the South Side. I'll make that happen. No, Annie said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. You'll make a board vote on it, then you'll make it happen. There was a pause. Then Richard said, You've been talking to your mother. Yes. Good, he said. The foundation needs more of that. After she hung up, Annie sat quietly for a moment. Naomi looked over from the sink. Well, Annie said. He listened. Naomi turned off the water. That's good. Then, after a beat, she added, Now make sure he remembers. 1 year later, the Harrington Grand Hotel hosted another event for Langford Children's Foundation, but it did not look like the old gala. There were no red carpets outside, no photographers waiting behind velvet ropes, no imported wine displayed under soft lights, no donor table raised higher than the others. The ballroom still had its chandeliers and white tablecloths, but the room had been rearranged. Nurses sat beside donors, housekeepers sat beside board members, parents from the hospital sat near doctors. Servers were not hidden along the walls. They had a table of their own, with name cards, hot meals, and chairs no one expected them to leave unless they chose to. Annie Brooks stood near the side entrance with Naomi, watching people come in. She wore a simple navy dress Naomi had helped her choose from a department store sale rack. Her hair was pinned back, and small silver earrings caught the light when she turned her head. She looked older than she had that night with the wine, though only 12 months had passed. Some years did that. They did not ask permission before changing a person. Naomi adjusted the edge of Annie's sleeve. Stop fussing, Annie said softly. I'm your mother. Fussing is in the contract. Annie smiled. You nervous? Naomi looked around the ballroom. No. Annie raised an eyebrow. Naomi sighed. Fine. A little. I still don't trust rooms this pretty. Me neither. Good. Pretty rooms need watching. Across the ballroom, Richard Langford was speaking with Mrs. Lillian Carter. Lillian wore a black suit tonight instead of a server's vest, though she had kept her old service pin on the lapel. She was now the official worker safety liaison for events funded by the foundation. And nobody moved a service route, vendor schedule, or staff assignment without her signing off. Richard listened while she pointed at a seating chart. No staff meal after the guests are fed, Lillian said. Same meal, same time, different room only if they ask for quiet. Richard nodded. Done. And if a donor snaps at a server, they receive one warning. Lillian looked at him over her glasses. Richard corrected himself. No warning if it's abusive. Now you're learning. Annie watched them and almost laughed. Richard Langford, the man who once moved through buildings as if walls opened for him by nature, now took notes when a hotel server in her 60s told him how the room should work. He saw Annie and Naomi and walked over. "Mrs. Brooks," he said. "Annie." Naomi nodded. "Mr. Langford, you both look well." "We are well enough," Naomi said. Richard had learned not to treat that as a small answer. "I'm glad." Annie looked toward the stage. "You kept it small." "I tried." "You invited a lot of people for small." "Different people," Richard said. That was true. The front tables were not reserved only for millionaires. One table held pediatric nurses from the night shift. Another held hospital janitors and cafeteria workers. Near the center sat 3 students from the first Annie Brooks Community Scholarship class, a young man whose mother cleaned operating rooms, a woman whose father drove a city bus, and a quiet 17-year-old from the South Side who wanted to study forensic science because, as she had written in her essay, evidence tells the truth even when people are afraid to. Annie had read that line twice. Richard followed her gaze. "They're waiting to meet you." Annie shook her head. "I'm not good at that." "At what?" "Being someone people wait to meet." Naomi said, "You'll learn. Just don't start believing your own poster." "There is no poster. That's why I agreed to come." Richard smiled, then turned serious. "No speech from you, unless you want to make one." "I don't." "Then you won't." The old Richard might have asked again. The new one did not. The dinner began without the slow parade of wealth Annie remembered from the year before. There was roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, salad, rolls, coffee, iced tea, and apple pie. Richard had said once that the menu seemed too simple. Lillian told him nobody trusted a charity dinner where the food looked like a sculpture. He had not argued. People spoke at their tables instead of performing across them. A doctor talked with a laundry worker about how often blankets disappeared from pediatric recovery rooms. A donor's wife asked a cafeteria cook for her cornbread recipe. A retired firefighter told Naomi about his granddaughter starting community college in the fall. It was not perfect. Annie saw awkward smiles, careful words, people trying too hard, but trying too hard was better than not trying at all. Near the end of dinner, Richard stepped onto the low stage. There was no glass podium this time, just a microphone stand and a small table with 3 scholarship folders on it. He looked out at the room. "1 year ago," he began, "I stood in this hotel and almost drank from a glass that had been prepared for my death. No one moved." Annie felt the room remember with him. "I was saved by someone I had not noticed," Richard said. "That is not a flattering thing to admit, but truth is not required to flatter us." Naomi glanced at Annie, then back to the stage. Richard continued. "The truth that night did not come from the head table. It did not come from the board. It did not come from a man with a title. It came from a young woman carrying a tray of wine. Her name is Annie Brooks." People turned toward Annie, but not with the same hunger the cameras had carried a year before. This room did not feel like it was taking from her. It felt, at least for the moment, like it was making space. Richard said, "The scholarship that carries her name is not a reward for silence after courage. It is a promise that people who notice, protect, serve, clean, drive, lift, cook, care, and speak will not be treated as background in the institutions they hold together." Mrs. Lillian Carter started clapping first. Others followed, but Richard raised a hand. "Not yet," he said. "Applause is easy, policy is harder, so here is what has changed." He listed it plainly. Independent audits every year. Public vendor records. Worker representatives on safety boards. Direct reporting lines for staff. Scholarship funding protected from donor influence. Hospital supply contracts reviewed by outside counsel. No event hosted by the foundation without staff rights written into the agreement. No poetry, no polished sadness, just promises that could be checked. Naomi leaned close to Annie. "That's better," Annie whispered. "Then what?" "Then pretty." Richard invited the 3 scholarship students to the stage. He gave each of them a folder, shook their hands, and said their names clearly into the microphone. When the young woman from the South Side stepped forward, She looked toward Annie before accepting hers. After the ceremony, the girl approached Annie with her folder held against her chest. "Miss Brooks?" Annie almost looked behind her. "Annie is fine. I'm Tasha. I know, I read your essay." Tasha's eyes widened. "You did?" "Yes. The line about evidence telling the truth. I liked that." Tasha looked down, embarrassed but pleased. "My dad said it was too much. Fathers say that when they're proud and scared." Tasha smiled a little. "Were you scared?" That night, Annie looked across the room. Richard was speaking with a nurse. Naomi was laughing at something Lillian said. Samuel Price stood near the exit, still watching everything, though he had accepted a slice of pie on a paper plate. "Yes," Annie said, "the whole time." Tasha seemed relieved. "People keep saying brave like it means not scared. People say a lot of things. What does it mean then?" Annie thought about the glass of wine, the glue mark, her mother's voice, Victor's ring, Charles's cold stare, the courtroom, the cameras, the small kitchen where she had cried over tea. "It means you do the next right thing before fear talks you out of it," she said. Tasha held that answer carefully, as if it were something she might need later. Near the end of the evening, Richard found Annie standing by the ballroom doors, looking toward the service corridor. "Thinking about last year?" he asked. "A little. I still do too." "Good," Annie said. "You should." He accepted that. Charles was sentenced this morning. Annie turned. Richard nodded. The plea finally went through. He admitted conspiracy, fraud, and ordering the bottle switch. He still claims he was protecting the foundation. People can call greed anything. "Yes," Richard said. "Julian's trial begins in spring. Victor took a deal. Dana is in witness protection until the financial cases finish." Annie looked back into the ballroom. "Does it feel like justice?" Richard considered the question. "Some days. Other days it feels like paperwork standing where justice should be." Annie nodded. "My mother says justice doesn't always arrive fair." Richard looked at her. "She says sometimes it arrives tired, scared, and carrying a tray." For a moment, Richard did not speak. Then he said, "Your mother has better speechwriters than I do. She doesn't need them." "No," he said, "she doesn't." The event ended before 10. People left through the same doors, donors and nurses and servers, mixing in the lobby while valets called names and coats were handed out. No one rushed Annie toward a camera. No one asked her to hold a wine glass for a photograph. No one tried to turn the night into a performance. At the front entrance, Richard's driver waited, but Naomi shook her head. "We'll take the bus," she said. Richard looked worried before he could hide it. Naomi saw. "We took the bus before you knew our names, Mr. Langford. We can still take it now." Annie smiled. "It's only 4 blocks. Samuel, standing nearby, said, "I can walk behind you at an annoying distance." Naomi looked at him. "You do that." So they walked. Chicago was cold, but not cruel that night. The river carried the lights of the buildings. Cars passed. Somewhere, a siren rose and faded. Annie and Naomi walked side by side, with Samuel far enough behind to pretend he was not guarding them and close enough that Naomi allowed it. At the bus stop, Annie looked back at the Harrington Grand. The chandeliers glowed through the tall windows. A year ago, she had entered through the service door. Tonight, she had left through the front. Naomi followed her gaze. "You all right?" Annie nodded. "I think so." "That's not an answer." "It's the one I have." Naomi accepted it. The bus arrived with a sigh of brakes. They climbed aboard, paid their fare, and found 2 seats near the middle. A man in a work jacket slept against the window. A nurse in blue scrubs held a grocery bag on her lap. An older woman with a church hat rested both hands on a cane. Ordinary people heading home under ordinary lights. Annie sat by the window. Naomi sat beside her. As the bus pulled away, Annie watched the hotel slide out of view. She knew the world had not been fixed. There would still be rooms where people with trays were ignored. There would still be men like Charles, smiling with clean hands and dirty books. There would still be children whose hospitals depended on people richer than they should have to beg. But she also knew something else now. A voice could interrupt a room. A name could be remembered. A sealed lie could be noticed. And sometimes, the first crack in a powerful secret came from someone standing close enough to see the glue. Naomi leaned her shoulder against Annie's. "You did good tonight. I didn't do much. You showed up." Annie looked out at the city, at apartment windows glowing one by one, at people living lives no ballroom would ever honor. "That counts?" Naomi smiled. Baby, most of life is showing up after the hard part, so the hard part doesn't get the last word. Annie let that settle. The bus rolled south through Chicago, away from the hotel, away from the stage, away from the glass that had never touched Richard Langford's lips. Annie rested her head against the window and closed her eyes, not because she was hiding, but because for the first time in a long while, she was simply tired. And that was allowed. She was not invisible anymore, but she was still Annie Brooks, daughter of Naomi, student, witness, worker, and a young woman who had learned that paying attention could be a burden, a gift, and sometimes the beginning of justice. That night, beneath all the noise of the city, she carried one truth home with her. The smallest voice in the room is not always small. Sometimes it is only waiting for the courage to be heard. The lesson of this story is simple but powerful. Never ignore a voice just because it comes from someone without power, money, or status. Annie Brooks was only a young server in a room full of wealthy people. But she saw the truth when everyone else was too busy protecting comfort, reputation, and appearances. Her courage reminds us that justice often begins with one person willing to speak, even when the room does not want to listen. True character is not shown by how we treat the important people at the table, but by whether we respect the ones quietly standing beside it. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.